Good evening. I'd like to call to order tonight's meeting of the ISD 191 Burnsville-Eagan-Savage School Board. The date is November 12th, 2020, and the time is 6:30 p.m. I'd like to start by inviting Director Schatz to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Director Schatz. Next, we'll start by approving the agenda. I will take a motion to approve.
So moved.
Moved by Director Schatz, second.
Second.
Seconded by Director Miller. Any discussion or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor, I'm sorry, Ms. Kenny, would you please call the roll?
Alt.
Aye.
Chester.
Aye.
Courier.
Aye.
Miller.
Aye.
Schatz.
Aye.
And the motion carries. Thank you. Next, we will start the information portion of our meeting. And I'd like to invite Vicki Roy to join us. We will be receiving a report for read for the record. Welcome, Vicki. There's no sound.
It's not coming through.
Yeah. No, we're missing sound.
Let's try it like this.
Vicki Roy, and for the past several years, I've been honored to share downstairs the record event with you. This is an event where our district has had readers from our communities share a book. Hybrid 2-day-a-week in-person classes or in full-time online classes, we had to find another way to participate in the event, and we did. Thanks to Dr. Battle for taking time to record this book, to Aaron Taylor and the Communications Department for recording it, and to Cindy Tech, the community.
Yeah. Apologies, I'm not sure exactly what's happening.
Do you want us to move on, Aaron, or do you want to keep trying?
I think that's probably best at this point. I'm not sure what's going to happen with the sound there, so we'll have to share that separately, and we'll put it up online as well.
That'd be great. Thank you. We appreciate, I know as part of this report, Vicki always shares how many people participated in Read for the Record. And Dr. Battle, I know I saw you participating, and there were many other community members that supported Read for the Record. So we'll look forward to being able to see that video later. Next, I'd like to invite Lisa Ryder, Executive Director of Business Services, and Dennis Hogeveen with Clifton Larson Allen. We will be receiving a report on the audit for FY20. Welcome, Dennis, and welcome, Lisa.
Thank you, Chair Alt, Board Director, Superintendent Battle. Tonight we have with us Robin Pickle, our 191 Director of Finance, and Dennis Hugeveen, our Principal at Clifton Larson Allen, the firm which conducted our 2019-2020 financial audit this summer and fall. Robin and I are available to respond as needed. However, at this time, I will turn the presentation to Dennis while I prepare the slides for viewing.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, everyone, for inviting me. I would much prefer to be there in person with you, but the times being that what they are, I'm assuming everyone can hear me fine. Thank you for the head nods. Always like to start by thanking the people who do the heavy lifting with the audit, Robin and her finance team, and Lisa, of course. I think it's fair to say, I did not check with Robin before I say this, but I think it's fair to say that no one would choose to do an audit virtually. I'm hoping that by the time the audit rolls around again next year, that we are back to doing it normal and in person. It's just not the same experience as doing it in person. It's a lot more work. It's a lot more burden, I think, on the business office staff. And so we would hope to be back to normal. So we really appreciate all the extra effort that the office had to put into that audit this year. Much like my wife, who is a school teacher, she would much prefer to be in her classroom as well, but you make the best of the situation, right? And you make the best of the situation, and that's what they did. The business office rose to the challenge, and we really appreciate all the hard work, as I said. So tonight, what we're going to do is review the audit results, as Lisa said. What we do is, as you recall, we take the high points from the executive audit summary. Our executive audit summary is in our opinion, the highlights of what we think we want to communicate to you as the school board. As your auditor, we really wanted to use the executive audit summary to highlight what we think are insightful commentary and things that are timely, relevant, insightful commentary that you wouldn't get otherwise. So hopefully over the years, Lisa always helps us draft, in that insightful commentary to help, in terms of making it relevant and easily understood and visually interesting and things like that, because we really want to help you tell the story, and hopefully you have a good way of communicating that to the public. So what we're going to do is have Lisa move the slide here, and what we're going to do is go through the audit results and then the financial results and things like that. So to the extent you have questions or things, I know someone's going to ask about questions at the end, but to the extent something comes up as far as commentary or questions as we go along, I'm perfectly fine if you want to interject those as we go along as well. Because if something comes into your mind, it's more than likely something that has occurred to someone else as well. So feel free to do that if you don't mind. Of course, the main thing that you're hiring an auditor to do is come in and give an opinion on the CAFR itself. Of course, the district for years has held itself to a much higher standard than you would have to by putting together a comprehensive annual financial report. That's an acronym that we call the CAFR. You submit that to the ASBO Certificate of Excellence program through the ASBO Foundation. We fully expect that this year's submission will once again qualify for the ASBO Certificate of Excellence in Financial Reporting. As it indicates here, for purposes of whoever keeps the minutes, always like you to note that we've issued a clean or an unmodified audit report. It's as good of an audit opinion as we are able to give any Minnesota school district, and it's as good as an own opinion as you're able to get. And then because we're required to follow governmental auditing standards, we have to give an opinion on what's called Yellow Book compliance. There's two different aspects to that Yellow Book opinion. There's a compliance aspect and an internal control aspect. We had no compliance issues to note related to the Yellow Book opinion letter. And then under the internal control aspect of that letter, we had no material weaknesses in internal control to report over financial reporting as well. This year, we have an interesting situation in that normally, because you had greater than $750,000 of federal funding, normally we'd also be reporting to you on your single audit at this point at the same time as your regular audit. This year, because of your CRF funding, COVID relief funds, the guidance that's put out by the Office of Management and Budget, or the OMB, they haven't released that guidance yet. And because part of your single audit is going to include that CRF funding, we can't do that single audit yet. We're precluded until that guidance comes out from OMB. We're precluded from doing your single audit. So unfortunately, that's to be done yet. So we don't know if it's going to be in December or January. We're hoping it's going to be December, but until the OMB puts out that guidance, we can't do the single audit. So that's to be done. I doubt it's going to necessitate us coming back and doing a report to the board, but that's, I guess, to be determined as well yet. But I suppose it would come down to whether there were findings or something too. If there was something relevant to report, that may make a determination as whether there's something to report or not too. But we did do the legal compliance audit. Of course, the Office of the State Auditor puts together a pretty comprehensive checklist of things that we have to test your compliance with as far as different state statutes. We did have one to report this year. I think it was the same as last year, related to some unclaimed property requirements about remittance of some reporting or some unclaimed checks or something to the state, and that has been complied with. We verified that last week. I think that that has been already complied with, so that's done and over with already. So then, in terms of financial results, there's a much more detailed report on ending fund balances in the executive audit summary. I think it's page 4. But what we have found in terms of the PowerPoint that we do with boards, the numbers just get way too tiny to do on a PowerPoint. So what we do is we just put the aggregated subtotals, of the unassigned category, non-spendable, committed, and then restricted without all the underlying details. So if you have the executive audit summary in front of you, you could easily, pull that out and look at the underlying details. But again, the subtotals are what we're most interested in. I always want to draw your attention back to the unassigned category of the fund balances anyway. You started the year with your, this is just strictly looking at the general fund. You started with an unassigned fund balance in the general fund that was 7.8 million. The end of the year at 10.2 million. The non-spendable category just represents the investment that you'd already made in things that can't be spent on something else. And in this particular case, it's prepaids. The other type of non-spendable would be inventory, but in your case, in the general fund, it's prepaids. In the committed category of fund balance, in your case, is for program over things, for non-capital items, facilities rental, and the pro pay program. And then the restricted category, you'll recall, is where the legislature gives you $1 to spend, but then they tie a string to it and tell you have to spend it in a specific way. The most common things that you'll recall is like the basic skills program, the operating capital is one of the more significant, the area learning center. The one I always like to use as an example, because people can relate to it, is where they give you $1 and tell you have to spend it for the gifted and talented program. It's part of the money that's buried in the general education program. So in this particular case for 2020, they say, here's $118,000 for gifted and talent that you have to spend for gifted and talented programming. But in your particular case at Burnsville, you chose to spend $532,000 for gifted and talented. So you're investing $413,000 above and beyond what the legislature says you have to spend on gifted and talented. So you're making an investment of your unassigned category of resources from up above. That's part of that unapproved transfer up above of the 2.6 million. You're investing that down in your gifted and talented program. So that's why we show it that way, because that's a choice as a school board, where you're one of the areas where you're making an investment from up above down below in the gifted and talented program. So that's why we show it that way. So looking at the bottom line there, the general fund in total, the 688,000 of revenue variance, or 0.52%. That's very typical of your variances over the years, about 0.5%. That's been, I looked back a couple of years, that's typically what it's been. That's very close budgeting on the revenues. On the expenditure side, the variance was about 4%, or about 5.4 million. Typically over the years, that's hovered anywhere from about 0.5% to about 7 or 0.7%, 7.2 I've seen, something like that. So that's more common. This is a little outside that norm of what the norm of the variance has been historically. Nothing about 2020 though has been normal, as you know. When you look into the underlying details, what I would recommend is that, anybody that wants more of an understanding of that would be to read the management's discussion and analysis at the front of the CAF, where there's an explanation of that. Part of the update of the budget for fiscal 21 is going to include the tightening up of that. You had a part of the explanation of that, as I understand it, is the new finance system had a new, a budgeting aspect, a module related to that, and there was an part of the budgeting, reliance on the budgeting module. There's probably a little bit of a conservative nature of that, which is pretty common in my experience of maybe a little bit too conservative on the budgeting of the expenditures until you get accustomed to what the system can do, and getting a trust level of confidence built up in that. And you have obviously the instance of COVID. Once we get back further into the presentation of the PowerPoint, you'll see how that breaks down in terms of the 5.4 million, because certainly it's not all salaries. It's like almost 850,000 of that is capital, which is strictly timing. Purchase services, obviously related to COVID, is a significant portion of it. COVID-19 obviously had a huge impact of it. The COVID-19 obviously had a huge impact in terms of curriculum development. All different types of things for those last quarter of the year had a huge impact. All of those things will fall out in terms of the budget update that'll happen for fiscal 21, as far as how much of that still got rolled into the 21 budget and things like that. So a lot of that still has to be rolled in. But one of the things that occurred to me though, and I spent some time trying to Google it today, because my recall is that when a school district has to adopt a new budgeting module, one of the things I was trying to recall is I've had a couple of districts where they had the opposite problem happen. Opposite in the sense that something unexpected happened in terms of budget to actual outcomes. And in those particular cases with the other districts that I'm thinking of, it was the opposite in the sense that it was a highly negative impact or outcome, in that they unexpectedly plunged their district into a situation called statutory operating debt, where they had this horrible situation occur where their budgeting system failed them significantly, where they rolled their budget into a new system and it failed them in that it didn't adequately reflect in terms of their budgeting what the actual costs that they were incurring happened with both employee salaries and employee benefits. And they got to the end of the year and it failed them miserably, and they plunged their district into statutory operating debt. That did not happen in this case, but because the opposite happened, where you ended up better off than what you needed to maybe have. But I would argue any day of the week that the situation is better in this regard. You'd rather come out better than worse off. So it can happen both ways. Unfortunately, because of the amount of time that it happened from when those situations had happened, I couldn't Google and go back and find the historical reference to provide. But I know it has happened, and the district isn't that far in terms of how far neighboring district wasn't too far away where that had happened. But okay, next slide. Food service fund. And we're going to look, I think there's another slide related to the actual meal service, but significantly impacted in terms of the number of meals, but the actual outcome itself was actually pretty good in terms of the amount of funding that was available for the meals that were served. So you can see that the actual outcome of the fund itself was actually pretty good. It's pretty stable in terms of the outcome was actually surprisingly better for what the outcome was related to COVID-19. And then the outcome for the community service fund was very good. And that really had nothing to do, as I understand it, related to the COVID-19, just because, as you'll recall, the community education program really has made strides in terms of turning that around. As you'll recall, we've discussed over the years programmatically making some changes to make sure that the program offerings were in line with what people were asking them to provide, and then making sure the costs are lined up with what the program offerings were generating the revenues and things like that. So obviously that had turned around very well, regardless of what happened those last 3 months, whatever, of the fiscal year. So very good, very good turnaround in terms of the community education programming. So capital projects funds kind of on a self-sustaining basis, doing as intended. And then the debt service fund, same thing. You levy what you need for debt service requirements, and then there's mechanisms in place to make sure you don't accumulate too much fund balance in your debt service fund. The other funds, the internal service funds, are working as intended to keep your insurance rates very stable for both dental and health benefits, the retirement benefits. All those things reflect very good, proper planning to keep things, as a relief valve for the general fund. So everything's working as intended. So it's all good to see. In terms of the general fund historical 5-year perspective on the next slide. There we go. Just kind of looking back, you'll recall that as the district's enrollment has declined, the board has had to make those tough decisions. And as you'll recall, I've told you, one of the things I've enjoyed watching over the years is that you haven't been afraid to make those tough decisions, that you've had to right size things. And, you've made the tough calls about when to make investments. Your public has been very supportive of you in terms of, supporting you with the referendum, but you haven't been afraid to make those tough calls. As enrollments declined, you've made the tough calls with the buildings. You've balanced out making decisions with when to reduce fund balance. You've had the ability to trust the numbers in terms of the budget to actual outcomes and things like that. So it's all been a balancing act. And so, all I can say is just keep that up, trust the numbers and keep making those tough judgments that you have to make. And there's not much else you can say. You have good outcomes, and you have to continue to make those tough judgments as they come at you. In terms of the enrollment information over the last 5 years, it just reflects that the open enrollment continues to be an impact. But again, you've been reacting to it and making decisions as you need to right size things as needed. That's an important element of any school district, is right sizing things as those judgments need to be made. The next slide is just a 5-year historical perspective on the revenue sources. And I was beginning to wonder if I was ever going to see a period of time where I could put together a 5-year graph where there were no accounting gimmicks being reflected in the 5 graph. And this is the second year in a row where we don't have any accounting gimmicks from the legislature reflected in the graph. Now, I would have bet you last year, I would have said I might get to retirement before we had any accounting gimmicks, but now COVID-19 might make me a loser in that bet, because we don't know what the legislature is going to have to do. We don't know in terms of balancing the state's budget, because of the percentage of the state's budget that is education. We just don't know, in terms of how fast the state's budget is going to recover and what they're going to have to do, because it's such a easy way to go as far as withholding, whether the tax shift or the withholding of aid and things like that. So it's going to be interesting to see what they come up with in the next legislative session. But I always think that's interesting. I always like to point out that I generally think that people find it interesting that the true percentage of funding that comes from the state, I think people perceive it differently. And I realize, sometimes people like to say, well, it's still taxpayer money, regardless of whether it's coming from the state or the local taxpayer. But I think people get my point, though, is that whether it's coming from my local pocket out of my real estate taxes that I pay on my home versus the state, I get that point. But I think people understand the point I'm making is I think they feel it's different than what it really is when it's coming from the state coffers. But anyway, and then the next slide is what I was making the point earlier in terms of the the breakdown of the budget variance on the expenditure side. So if you really dig into those details, you can kind of see it here as far as the 5.4 million or the 4.09%. The capital of 866,000 of that right off the top is strictly timing differences on capital expenditures, and then $1 million of it, or 1.1 million of it, is purchase services, which is more than likely timing differences as well, related to a lot of it COVID-19 things that simply just didn't occur at the time because of the timing of things that didn't occur with all the things that happened with distance learning and whatnot. And I've heard maybe the percentage could be like a 60-40 kind of a split kind of a thing, but who knows? But I'm guessing you're going to see when you do the budget update for fiscal 21, the mid-year budget update, you're going to get a more detailed breakdown of how much of that you're going to be able to recapture in terms of that budget update, and get a better sense for how much of that can be taken back into the budget. So. Yeah. All right. So the next slide is the food service fund meals served. And you can see there what I was referencing earlier in terms of the huge drop in the number of meals served. But again, totally related to the impact of COVID-19. But again, remarkable in terms of what the balancing act that the fund was able to do in terms of the impact on fund balance, keeping it on such an even keel and balancing out the expenditures with the revenues that were available. I realized the funding for some of the meals with the summer program and whatnot was a little bit higher and stuff like that, but I think they did a good job of maintaining a good balance there. So, and then we do provide the breakdown of the full price, reduced price, and free meals there, which that did include the breakfast program, but it's relatively constant, with what it had been in prior years. So the next slide is just looking at expenditures per ADM, and I know it would be interesting to be able to compare fiscal year 2020 to other districts, but again, that data, which is profiles data, won't be published until next year by the Department of Ed. So the apples to apples comparison for 2019 is in the middle column there for Burnsville. One of the byproducts, I think, of the implementation of GASB 84, unfortunately, is that it's grossing up some of the numbers in fiscal year 20, unfortunately. I think one of the things is I think maybe that's like district and school administration, and certainly Lisa or Robin can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's one of the numbers that got grossed up in fiscal year 20. Unfortunately, that's one of the numbers you wouldn't choose to have grossed up if you had a choice. And I could be wrong, but Lisa, isn't that where flex benefits maybe got grossed up, unfortunately?
The flex benefits falls into that category, yes. So both revenue and expenditures increased for this year.
Yeah, so that's unfortunate because that's not where you would choose to, through no fault of anyone's, you wouldn't choose to want administration or that particular line to get grossed up just because you had to report that way to the Department of Ed. But anyway, the good news is every district in the state, for comparative purpose next year, everyone's going to be reporting it the same way. So it'll all be relative, that all districts are reporting it the same way. So that'll be the good news. But it kind of sticks out this year when you're the only district reporting. It's not an apples to apples comparison. That's the only reason I wanted to kind of point it out. Your district didn't all of a sudden invest in administration or something. That's why I wanted to point it out. I think the other one I was going to point out is that always kind of jumps at me is operations and maintenance, because you're grandfathered in or something for LTFM or something, right? So
correct.
You're going to always have a higher number on that line because you're allowed to do things that other districts aren't able to do in that particular category. But anyway, but I still think it's still interesting to kind of point some of these things out. But all right, next slide is just to say thank you for allowing us to serve the district. It's always been a great working relationship. Our audit staff really enjoy working with your team of people, and we really appreciate it. So with that, that's what we wanted to review with you. So I guess I'll turn it back over to you guys.
Great. Thank you very much, Dennis. Board members, are there questions or comments? Director Schatz?
Thank you. I appreciate the report. It's always really comforting and exciting to know that we are really being so fiscally responsible. And again, I agree, a huge shout out to our business department, our accounting department, for all the hard work that they do, that it's, I know our district finances are in really great hands, and that is, especially in these uncertain times, that's a really great place to be. And I'm excited to see that student accounts, activity accounts are not mentioned this year. So good job, Lisa.
Thank you, Director Schatz. Board members, any other questions or comments? No? This is, I always appreciate the narrative, Dennis, that you and Lisa pull together. It definitely brings the numbers to life and helps to tell the story that might be hidden in all the numbers. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let's see,
Thank you.
We are turning to Stacy Sovine, Executive Director of Human Resources. We will be receiving a report about fall enrollment.
Good evening, Cheryl, Dr. Battle, members of the board. More numbers. I can hardly contain my excitement as we move in through all of this. Each November, we bring to you an enrollment report that reflects our October 1 student counts, which were mandated to report to the state. It provides them with as meals, free and reduced, students of color, special ed, free and reduced, a number of different things. The October 1 count is a head count. It is the actual number of students that we have. And that is in contrast to what we talk about when we talk about average daily memberships or ADMs, or even some of the numbers that roll into our end of year numbers, which includes those ADMs and looks outside of just K-12. So the October 1 count is a head count. And what we'll do is we'll look at our population, the composition of that, look back at prior years, and look at enrollment trends as a whole. So our population for October 1st, 2020 was 8,127 for early education through grade 12. If we look at just our K-12 numbers, that is your 7616 number that we're looking at. And this is a breakdown by grade level for elementary all the way up to grade 12. Grade 12 is always, I'll point this out, always a little bit higher, as we have seniors who are returning to complete the credits needed to graduate. So one of the things that we experience as a result of that is a drop in enrollment after first semester. That's just built into the numbers as a whole. Also, the other thing that I want to point out is our kindergarten enrollment is at 610 students. That is about 45 students fewer than what we have been enrolling over the past few years. And that's a national trend. We're seeing that in our neighboring districts as across the country. I mean, families are holding on to their kindergartners and their first school experience if they can for one more year is pretty much the way we're anticipating that. The other thing that I want to point out is starting with grade 4, for purposes of staffing, we were keeping track of incoming classes of kindergarten, and we're able to build in projections as far as rolling up for staffing purposes. Starting with grade 4, I have data that shows that for each grade 4, grade 3, grade 2, grade 1, we had 660 kindergartners enroll. So if I had 660 kindergartners enroll, by the time they're at 4th grade, I've lost 140 of them. This is reflected in our open enrollment issue that we will discuss or show you in a little bit. But each grade level, after the students come in, I lose on average 30 students per grade level each year. So again, we talked briefly about our fall enrollment, end of year enrollment. Just I'll point out one of the numbers that we did talk about last spring with our budget was 7606. That was our end of year enrollment that we were using that didn't include ADMs. That was just K-12 for budgeting and staffing purposes. We're at 7616 right now. Again, we're going to see probably a dip of about 50 seniors typically at the end of first semester. So we are probably going to end up somewhere around 7560, 7570 for our end of year enrollment. Again, just a recap of the numbers. This is more budgeting, a recap here. I'm not going to get into the budgeting unless Lisa wants to come back to it. We'll speak more about our projected enrollment at a later date when we get into those budget conversations. But this is just how the numbers play out here as well. Composition of our families. I have another chart in a little bit that will break this down a little bit differently, but these are the raw numbers. Over the last, again, 6 to 7 years, we've had 5,000 students of color. And that number has remained pretty well flat. Each year, 5,000 students. The number of students that we are losing is in our white population year over year. This is a breakdown of your buildings. We will have a little bit more conversation when we start talking about variances as to the breakdown and how it's different from last year. But this takes a deeper dive into the specific race and ethnicity groups. Special education has sat around that 15% pretty much across the district. Again, that's a very stable number for us. LEP, our English language learners, district average is 19%. We expect a higher number at the elementary within their first years of academic language, beyond social language. By the time students reach secondary, we expect them or hope that they are moving forward and moving on. Free and reduced. Free and reduced this year is an anomaly for us. We are down a lot. I believe by almost 1,200 off the top of my head as far as families being served with free and reduced meals. A lot of that may have to do with the number of students that are enrolled in our virtual academy, our online programming. So families that aren't coming into the school buildings may not see the need to apply for additional services for free and reduced meals and therefore aren't applying. But that is an area that we have seen a steep decline. Again, this kind of brings you looking at our long-term information. I want to point out in 2009, 2010, our resident total was just under 10,500 students. Our residents in 1920 was 10,537. So the pool of students in which we have in the Burnsville-Eagan-Savage area has actually slightly increased. Again, where we are losing our numbers, as you can see, between the residents attending the 9,200 to the 7,700, we're not retaining them. We're not keeping them here. And again, I point that back to our kindergarten numbers. When our kindergarten class size is stable, but we lose students after that point, folks are making choices after that point in time. You can also see the steep increase over the years by nearly 1,600 students attending elsewhere. An increase of 1,600 students, I should say. Students coming to the district has also increased. So over that 10-year mark, we were at 503, we're at 565. Back in 12, 13, 13, 14, we saw a real big increase. Part of that is because we were one of the first districts to offer all-day kindergarten without additional charge. That is our bubble class. And it was nice to be a forefront runner on that one. So again, typically with most districts, you see usually a balance of students coming in and students exiting the district. It's very close. And a lot of that's around jobs, daycare, families, whatever. Usually you have about the same amount in and out. For us, it's significantly different. Whoops, sorry. Breakdown of where our students are attending as far as school choice. Here, charters makes up is a growing portion actually over the last couple of years, and other districts are being tuitioned out. The vast majority of our students are going to ISD 196, our neighbors to the east, with following up with Prior Lake. Then Bloomington and Lakeville are significantly less, but more than the other districts. Miscellaneous could be private schools, charter schools, and such. This table here is a breakdown even more of where the students are going. Again, just to point out, when we have the 1920, we do an October 1 count to where we report to the state, but the information is being cleaned up and compiled from all the districts, and that happens all the way through December. So when we're looking at our enrollment out and where they go, that data is a year behind. Residents attending non-public schools or private schools, about 828. Again, that number is a little bit higher, but fairly stable over the years. Looking at our ECSE programs, voluntary pre-kindergarten and our school readiness programs. ECSE is stable, a little bit of an increase. VPK this year, because of much like our kindergarten, is down a little bit. School readiness, because that is a fee-based program, has steadily seen a decline as well. It went, especially with the option of a state-funded VPK available to them. Enrollment over the 2 years in our elementary buildings. Again, we closed Burnsville-Eagan-Savage and Sioux Trail. Students were redistributed to the other buildings. Our largest buildings, Harry Bishop, Hidden Valley, William Byrne, all saw fairly significant increases in their enrollment. Sky Oaks stayed fairly flat. Vista View, Ed Neal, Ron, pretty stable within their capacity as a whole. The challenge this year with building capacity, again, with COVID, social spacing. Fortunately, in that case, we had virtual academy, which helped offset a lot of that. High school, a slight decline. Eagle Ridge and incline, both Eagle Ridge and Nicollet, we saw significant increases. Your 5-year trend, again, the number of students in which we have living within our district is fairly flat. We are losing students by choice. Open enrollment is by choice. I talked briefly earlier that our students of color over the last few years has remained right around 5,000. So just above this line here, all down would be the breakup of your different students, and your white students is what is declining overall. Again, special ed, fairly stable even with the decline in enrollment, around 15%. LEP students also just kind of bumps up somewhere between 16 to 20%, is fairly stable as well. Free and reduced meals, again, you can kind of see that significant drop here from 4,300 down to 2,900. I said 1,200, it's closer to 1,400 students, families that are students that have not applied. And that was a race around the track for enrollment numbers.
That was a good race. Thank you, Stacy. Board members, any questions, comments? You might have to wave at me because we have so many people. I'm not, Director Miller, I saw you wave.
Yeah, I'll jump in. First, a couple of clarifications, Stacy. If I go back to slide 17, the pie chart. So you had just quickly gone around with Rosemont 196 being the largest. And when you wrapped up with the miscellaneous other 179, I think you said charter private, which actually doesn't, I think you meant, correct me if I heard you wrong, but that actually, if you go to the table on the next slide, the 179 is a standalone category of miscellaneous other. I don't really need a whole explanation. I'm just curious, a couple of examples that would fall into that. Is it just any number of, because those would be true public schools.
Those would be public schools, right? If I said that those were part of the private schools, that isn't. Those are where students are reported to other public schools.
Okay. Then on the charter block below, I'm just a little curious about Aspen Academy. That seems to have significantly grown in the last 5 years. Is there a backstory to that? And then maybe you're not the right one to completely answer that. Is there a specific population or some driving force or something going on there that is that something we need to be worried about or address directly? Or
It is located near us. It is in Prior Lake.
yeah. Okay, so it's all right. I thought that's the one. It's one on 13. Okay, so it's pulling from our Savage residents more than likely. Okay. So go then back up to the grade level table, bar chart table, slide 5, I guess, and you mentioned the 771 grade 12 is unusually high. That's a typical, as you have some returning students. Is that typical of the unusualness of it? Because I'm showing if you take the population bodies before that running an average of 570. So, you know, we're a good couple of hundred above the average. Is that pretty typical, or is it your bounce back usually more like 50 or something?
You have the students, the seniors who are returning for credits. Also, starting in 10th grade, 10th, 11th grade, you have not only the high school, you have the alternative high school. So you're also attracting potentially seniors from other districts as well that are in credit recovery.
But I think would it not be fair to say that the 771 is taking all those outliers, those outside impact events? It's still that grade 12 is still a higher population than the following grade. Is that correct?
Well, as far as the student count this year, yes, but each year it is. Your 605 number next fall will be probably closer to 700 as well. That 11th grade of 605 will increase as well. Yep.
Yeah, I understand that, but it won't increase to 770 necessarily, right?
Yeah, probably not that high.
Well,
Yeah.
last year was 768, And last year's 11th grade was 647. So
Yeah.
it's very similar.
Okay, so I mean, all right, well, then the point I was going to make is, as we talk sometimes about potentiality of, I know we settled this conversation a few meetings ago, but eventually needing another middle school. Again, this chart tends to prove that, you know, the grades that are coming after the ones that are exiting our high school are down. And we have a lot of ground to make up. We're probably, even if we were just to automatically stop open enrollment issues tomorrow, we still have just natural attrition is going to happen in the system. I guess was more of the comment I was going to make there. The last thing I want to, this is a comment to point out. We go back down to, where was it? The ethnicity of the open enrollment. Where was that? Slide 26. So we see this every year, and I think it just merits again for anybody that is actually listening or watches this later on to point out the fact that we have an open enrollment problem, obviously. The declining number is in the white ethnicity category, and Stacy, you mentioned this. In fact, if you look at the what they call Black, not Hispanic category and the Hispanic categories, there's growth in those categories. And if you look then back up to and you don't have to go to the chart for it, Stacy, but if you go back up and look at the high school ethnicity breakdown, you'll notice that it's it's more white than a lot of our elementary schools. So for all the doom and gloom that I tend to talk about, I do want to point out a little positivity here, that as our the ethnic makeup overall of our student population is changing as they grow up through our programming. The mix is heavier with the ones that are growing in attendance in our district and not enrolling out. So there would appear to me, looking at the numbers, a stemming of the bleeding at some point in the future. Maybe not as soon as we would like to see, but somewhat near in the future. So hope you followed my logic on that, but that's just a statement for everybody listening. So, all right, I think that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Director Miller. Director Schatz?
Thank you. Thank you, Stacy. It's always such a interesting report and really important data for not only for us to know, for our staff to know, but our community at large as well. I have a couple questions about the, so one sort of, maybe they're more general questions, but you talked about a couple of times about how this year the numbers are what they are, and they're off or off trend or unusual because of the pandemic, of course. And specifically, you called out the free and reduced lunch numbers. And so I guess my question, not only maybe about those numbers and maybe about whatever numbers is overall, but how will this year affect our funding, I guess, for next year? I mean, how's that going to work? Because it's such an unusual year. And even for enrollment, as you say, it's a nationwide trend that the kindergartners are staying home. And so maybe it's two questions. One is how does it affect funding for next year from our governmental bodies? But also, how does the board figure out how to calculate those numbers, for funding for our internal budgeting purposes for next year? So two really simple questions for you. So yeah.
They both sounded like they had a common theme around the money. So I'm going to turn it over to Lisa.
Oh, good move, Stacy.
So with regard to funding, the impact for the compensatory funding as a result of our numbers for free and reduced being down under current law, it will be problematic for us. There is conversation around that, and they've asked for enrollment projections for the November forecast for the legislature. So we know it's on their radar. They understand that this is something that's just not ISD 191. It's statewide. It's indicative of our current environment with COVID. I'm sorry, I didn't catch the second question fully.
Well, it was more about, we as the board, then as we set we're coming into budget season, we're setting some budget numbers around our expected enrollment and things like that. And I guess this is where, Stacy, I'm going to loop you back into the conversation about the how do we figure out, staffing? What should we be projecting for enrollment numbers for next year? Do we expect those kindergartners to float back into first grade? Things like that. And I'm not, of course, expecting crystal ball, for you to know what's going to happen, but what can we be thinking of to put a little framework around those discussions?
Well, with the assumption that we are going to have a COVID-free experience next fall, you could be looking at a number as close as 700 for kindergarten enrollment. If you have the pandemic still in effect, I think you'll be looking at a kindergarten class very close to the 610. I base that on the fact that our kindergarten class has been fairly stable around 660. So the students that we lost this year are going to age out. They're going to have to come back or return to school. That opportunity to send them with their 5, or early 6, that's going to expire. The second bubble is going to be for those families then, if we're not under the COVID experience, that I would expect them to jump back in, get the kids back into school, or get the kids to school, because that's just what we've experienced in the past. So we could swing anywhere from around 610 students to close to 700 for kindergarten next year.
Okay, that's very helpful. And I think it's really, great for our community to kind of have on the top of their heads as well, that, a lot of these numbers, budgetary, enrollment, staffing, all of those things, we may not know what we can do with that until kind of well into our budget process and well into, the spring, summer-ish of next year. And so we'll have to, of course, we'll be doing the best we can, but important for our community to remember that that will very heavily impact what we're doing the next few months. So thank you, Stacy and Lisa.
Dr. Battle, you wanted to make a comment?
Yes, thank you, Chair Alt. Director Schatz, as Lisa shared, there are conversations centered around how to hold us harmless. If you look at the demand for our community meals, we know that we have food insecurity. And so I believe through our legislative action, and so grateful that we have a legislative committee. So some of our organizations that we're a member of, such as AMSD, have already started the conversation and working with us and other districts, because it would be a reduction in compensatory. And based on the community need, we don't think the numbers are accurate with those who have actually filled out the application. We believe the need is there. So I would offer one strategy is through federal as well as state legislative action to hold districts harmless.
Thank you very much.
Or provide some relief to offset it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Battle. Thank you, Director Schatz. Any other questions, board members, comments? Seeing no hands up, I'm going to dovetail Director Schatz's comments just with a question. So when we talk about free and reduced lunch, our minds automatically go to the meals that are provided to students. What other services do families qualify for when they qualify for the free or reduced lunch? Lisa or Stacy?
If I may. So when we know that a family is free or reduced eligible, they receive a letter when they are eligible for free or reduced meals. And with that letter, they can utilize that letter throughout all of our programming for waivers, for fees, and so that's meaningful to individual households and assist them in that process. As a district, those numbers are oftentimes utilized for funding of title federal funds as well as our compensatory state funds. And so they become kind of the base and crux of some of that other additional funding that we receive. And it's imperative that something be acknowledged with regard to the impact of COVID on this year for all of the schools in the state of Minnesota, because it will be very impactful for districts and particularly for ours.
And I would also, I agree, I completely agree that, you know, the legislative conversations need to happen at the state and federal level. I would also say that, you know, we have some local control as well. I know that, can you guys hear me? You can hear me? Okay. It looked like I was dropping out. That, you know, I remember, I don't know if it was 2 or 3 years ago, there was a concerted push to really encourage and welcome families and just completing that application in all of our buildings. And it was very successful in, you know, identifying, you know, previously unidentified need and making it more of a norm. And I would say, you know, since we can influence legislative decisions and we can also, you know, add to what we're doing in terms of the conversations that we have with families and letting them know, it helps, you know, it helps to feed the children, and it also supports our overall school system. And so we really do need, regardless of whether your child is attending, well, now at least at secondary, it's all virtual, but whether you're taking advantage of the free meals, there still is a very good reason for each of our families to complete the application, even if it's just to be told, nope, sorry, you don't qualify. So that's my one plug. With that, thank you very much, Stacy. This is always a really interesting report. Very informative. Next, we're turning to Dr. Battle, and we are going to receive a report about Vision 191.
Thank you, Chair, all directors of the board. Tonight, I will share an update about Vision 191 funds, and we'll have Aaron Tinklenberg start the screen sharing. I love research, and it was wonderful to research the history and learn more about the foundation for Vision 191. And so tonight, we'll go to the presentation purpose. So tonight, Lisa Ryder and I will provide an overview of the continuation of Vision 191. We'll share background, the history of progress, areas of focus, and we'll give you an update from last year, this year, and going forward. Also a process for recommended projects and ideals for continuing the work, specifically in academics as well as projects. So on the next slide, we just want to remind everyone, this was a graphic that was used in some presentations. So Vision 191 was a plan to redesign our district to meet the needs of today's students. Although the referendum was about money for building and technology, the changes to our schools were about meeting those needs in 2 major ways. First was ensuring that each student was prepared to succeed in the future. We now know this is part of our mission, Future Ready, and doing so in the context of the whole family and support from our wonderful communities that we serve. We have this now in our mission, Community Strong. It was adopted a few years after Vision 191 was launched. Next slide, please. So we have to recognize that the 2 referendum questions were very specific, and it was much more than about buildings, office space, and technology. It actually included elementary, middle, and high school educational programs to support learning at high levels, So those were the primary three areas. And so we look back on the referendum questions. So there was a question for the community to support funding to realign grades to be a K-5, 6, 8, and 9, 12. Repurposing the senior campus, which was in our Diamond Head Education Center. We had the senior students here, and then adding classrooms at Burnsville High School to accommodate all students in one building, 9, 12, and remodeling elementary schools. Next slide, please. Then we move on to also in question 1 was to build an activity center at Burnsville High School for extracurricular and community activities. Also to improve security at our schools and to relocate programs and offices to provide a more effective and efficient space. And so all of the central offices were spread out through the community, and with the referendum, they all are housed now primarily in Diamond Head Education Center. Moving on to question 2. There was a request for approval for $2.5 million per year for technology to equip classrooms with resources that will allow teachers and students to personalize learning. So you're really getting at that tailoring for each individual student. Also, there has to be, as we all know now, how much we've learned through COVID, you have to have ongoing training and support for teachers for using instructional technology in their classrooms. And lastly, to ensure district-wide infrastructure meets the needs of today's schools. Moving on, looking back at the Vision 191 journey. So I thank board members and members of my team and other staff who gave me history lessons. So February 2015, the voters approved the referendum. 2016-17, those building improvements were made. The consolidation of those central office support programs to Diamond Head. 2017-18 was the launch of the high school pathways, the middle school model, and the wonderful elementary maker spaces. As one parent of a kindergartner shared with me, maker spaces, that's where the magic happens. 2018-19, training for non-licensed staff for the technology, and the launch of district-wide projects for our culturally proficient school system, CPSS, in the organization. Next, we move on to an update for this year. Last year, we launched the pre-K-12 pathways, started that work, and this year is the first year of a 3-year plan. Last year, we involved our community, had a community partner, Marnita's Table, where we had a lunch and learn, where there was an after school learn with Burnsville High School students, and we had a wonderful community-wide event where we had seniors to toddlers all come together in one night to share their commitment to the children and families. As you know, our wonderful high school students are so committed to community service. Still continue to pack meals for Brain Power. And then we have a very strong partnership with Burnsville Chamber that has continued. And this year was the first year the Burnsville Education Network held its first ever parent resource fair. And we have to really applaud our voters again for the technology levy approval. We were somewhat well poised to respond to COVID-19 in comparison to many districts across the state, because we had a one-to-one learning device for our high school and middle school students and a 2-to-1 for elementary. And I say it, we're well poised because what we found from COVID-19, it did illuminate some inequities. And so we did need to purchase learning devices for elementary students. So we would have a one-to-one living in instruction in a virtual environment. We also found that some of our employees did not have the tools to work remotely. We also found the inequity of access. And so that's why I would say well poised. So without that levy, I think we would have been in dire straits last spring. Next slide, please. Also, wanted to share one more thing about the, if we can go back one more, I'm sorry. Just the launch of the pre-K-12 pathways, wanted to mention that a really big part, initially with Vision 191, there was the hope to backwards map the pathways to elementary. And so last year with our launch of the pre-K-12 pathways, we've been able to start to fulfill that promise. And so we are organizing our K-5 schools in 4 pathways: visual and performing arts, math, design and engineering, health, well-being, and social, emotional, and entrepreneurship. And full implementation will begin in 2021. We are redesigning our middle schools to have evidence-based practices, the adoption of common schedules, including a win time and specialist schedule that we were unable to do this year due to the social distancing and health protocols we needed. So we have been using those specialists for our hybrid learning. At the high school, we are developing 4 new new pathways: advanced manufacturing, cybersecurity, criminal justice, law enforcement and corrections, and education. We are on track for our pathways implementation as of September. And as you know, parents and staff are excited to bring the support to our advanced learners, STEM, and other rigorous curriculum in literacy and math to all buildings. With that, we can move on to the next slide. And I do believe I'm going to turn it over to Lisa Ryder.
Thank you, Dr. Battle. The process that we've used for recommending projects, we had buildings and office space ideas that came about from staff and a group then to review each idea. So we basically went to our leaders in our departments and buildings and asked for them to seek concepts and ideas of what it was that, knowing the purpose of the review and comment that was approved for this bond issuance, and what it is that was still maybe needed that might have been overlooked. Typically, think of it when you build a home, you build your home, you get it built, but then you start to realize some of the things that might need to be adjusted or fixed. And so those are the things that we were kind of, let's go back through and what is it that got missed kind of thing. That made sense. So as those ideas came forward, we then applied them against the review and comment list to see, is it applicable here? Or is it something else we need to address either through LTFM, capital means, or other means? And so with those, that required a group to review those, and that was the executive leadership team. The review and comment I mentioned was a report, a very long report that gave all the details of what it was we were planning to do with the $65 million that we asked for in the bond issuance. And so that review and comment was originally submitted to the Commissioner of Education of Minnesota, and the purpose of that was for them to sign off on it, essentially approve the fact that this made sense to them, and that we could then go forward with our election and with the voters' approval, then continue on with the whole plan. So as you see listed on this slide is a number of the various different things that were included in there in summary form. We go to the next slide. As of October 29th, 2020, our audit findings is complete, but I took a look at what was the cash balance as of October 2nd. And so that's what you're seeing here. In the bank for this particular fund was $1.9 million. So there's a little bit of a lag between the audit because that's June 30th ending, but I wanted you to understand how much is actually in the bank as of October 2nd. And so that's what we have remaining in our Vision 191 funds, which is the remaining funds from the bond issuance that was voted on in February of 2015. Next slide. So the conversation then rolls to, we have 1.9 million left, and we've basically gone through what I would call 2 rounds of reviewing what it was that was necessary. As we wrapped up at the high school, and I mentioned as an analogy to building a home, when we first finished up in May of 2017, I reported to the board at that time what it was that we knew we still had outstanding projects, and there were some major projects at that time, to the tune of about $1.4 million that we needed to address. So that was round 1, and that got taken care of. And then the round 2 is where we implemented those conversations with principals and department leaders to identify what else. And that's where you found things like middle school furniture, for example, elementary media soft furniture, that those that didn't get that had the opportunity, additional security and cameras. Can't tell you how many times as we finalized things, and then as we shifted students around, and now even as we moved and closed 2 buildings, the need for certain cameras in certain positions and such is just an ongoing review, and so that's continuing. So those types of things are what I would consider round 2. So here we sit now. It's $1.9 million as of October 2nd, and what you see before you now are the recommended projects that we have identified for you at this time, some of which you will see are actually in process. So those are essentially the first 3 for sure, yes, 4 actually, with the surveillance cameras as well. But you also see that there's some asterisks next to a few of the items. Those are items that are recommended by our Director of Operations, Properties and Transportation, Dave Lake, who is also in attendance tonight and can speak to any questions or details we may need. And then you see that there is some rows are colored a light green, and some are kind of a rose color, right? So the light green is referring to if this weren't a project completed with the funds remaining in the Vision 191 dollars, then where else could we address those issues and needs? And the ones that are in green would not be eligible for long-term facility maintenance, LTFM. And so we would need to look to our general capital funds to make those things happen. And the things that you see down in the rose colored area, those are areas that LTFM, long-term facility maintenance, may be of ability to use those funds. But in some cases, if it's new, you can't do LTFM then. So then we'd have to be looking for federal funds if it's available to us. Also included on this screen is a link to the review and comment. So if you go to the review and comment, you got the whole book there then on this link. But if you go to page 12, that's where it begins to break down exactly the description of what was included in the review and comment initially. And page 15 tells you kind of the budgets that we laid out. So why do we have these funds left over? These funds are left over because of a few things. One is interest earned all along the way, right? Secondly, it's dollars that we didn't spend because we were able to come in under budget. And so it's a good problem to have, but at the same time, that's why they sit here, right? And I will say that we've delayed decisions on what to do with this in the past year, simply because of the conversations and the decisions that were in process by the board as to which buildings would be closed. And so we wanted to make sure we understood that too before we wrap these funds up. So what you see here is a list of recommendations that we believe, and in the second column, I guess it's the third column, it's the one that says R&C reference, it's the review and comment reference. And I'm referring to pages 12 through 15 on the review and comment, and under which number or letter do we believe this particular project falls under for eligibility to utilize these funds. And with that, I believe the next slide is a conclusion to our report.
That concludes our report.
Great, thank you both. Board members, any comments or questions? I'm not seeing hands raised. Let me see. Nope. All right. Thank you. This was a great review and summary, and good for our community to have that brief refresher and the explanation as to why we still have these funds. So thank you both very much for pulling this together. Next, we are turning to Dr. Battle's report on District 191's efforts to implement COVID-19 related educational and public health guidance issued by the MDE and MDH respectively. Dr. Battle.
Thank you, Chair Alt and directors of the board. Tonight, staff and I will share information about our summer programming where we piloted key components for our fall launch for classroom instruction. Also, I will share information related to our 2 counties data, Dakota and Scott County, our dashboard for learning model and decision-making process, our COVID-19 dashboard for our confirmed COVID-19 cases and quarantines for students and staff. Additionally, I will share details about our transition from hybrid to a distance learning model, and staff will share plans for activities and athletics. First, we will have a K-12 Alternative Learning Center summer programming presentation from Jason Sellers and 2 very special guest teachers, Ashley Gravink and Leanne Bloms. And I'll turn it over to Jason Sellers.
Thank you, Dr. Battle, Board Chair Alt, and Board Directors. I'm going to present I'm going to share my screen now and present what should be in your board packet already. The first thing I would like to say is that across the state of Minnesota, the governor has recognized today as Community Education Day. Without the support of Director Umhofer and the entire Diamond Head Education, community education staff, being there throughout the early part of the summer to have parents come in and pick up curriculum kits, to field calls, and to be able to handle registrations, summer programming simply would not have gotten off to the great start that it did. Secondly, and most importantly, you should know that none of what we did this summer we had ever done before. We were flying the plane, or we were building the plane as we were flying it. And I want to give a special shout out to all K-12 staff that participated in working to support our students this summer. Their dedication and their willingness to improve their technological savviness really made a substantial difference in moving the bar for our summer programs. First and foremost, if you take a look at the first slide, this is the K-12 summer program data. This is a high-level overview of all programs that we offered this summer through our Area Learning Center. In terms of the schedule, you'll notice that there was only one change in schedule. MDE articulated that we were not able to start targeted services, that is K-7 summer programming, until July. So you will see in the schedule column that the only change in terms of amount of time that we had to abide by for providing summer program for our community was really in the K-7 summer program. So we went from our typical 6-week program to a 4-week program. All other programs remain 4 weeks. In terms of enrolled students, you'll notice that there was a little bit of a decline in each of our program areas, and that was expected. But what I will tell you is if you were to compare our numbers to any district around us, we more than doubled and in some cases quadrupled our summer program student enrollment totals compared to districts near us. The third column represents student outcomes. I wanted to make sure to give you the comparison between 2019 and 2020 because I wanted to show that our teachers were able to work with our students and have very similar levels of average increases in math and in literacy according to assessments in the curriculum that we provided. In our 8th grade STEM program, although we weren't able to do field trips and we weren't able to meet in person, we still had 85 students that generated 76 credits. There will be additional credits that are generated throughout the course of this fall as they complete some of their youth service requirements. In terms of our 912 credit recovery program, we had about 60 fewer students, actually about 50 fewer students, and we earn about 194 credits. There are currently 200 students that did not finish in the summer program that are in our fall semester credit recovery program with Courtney Flowback Jackson. And they started this past Monday. So they had the opportunity to finish those credits. The demographic slide I wanted to highlight was the K7, and I think this is particularly important given some of the information that was provided to the board earlier. Our demographics reflect the demographics that you see in those earlier slides for summer. Please note that in terms of special ed, we're right about that 15%. And in terms of students of color, our numbers very much replicate the numbers that Stacy provided earlier. One thing that we do see a very large spike in summer and in after school targeted services as well is our ESL population registering for those programs. This summer, we had around 11 students that spoke Spanish only across 4 different grade levels. We ended up, parents were going to disenroll those students from the summer program because they literally were sitting there. We got them on the Zoom classes, but they couldn't understand what was being taught or said. So we were able to hire one of our district teachers who actually speaks Spanish, and she taught the class in Spanish so those students and families could stay in summer school. Weekly attendance data, I felt like this was really important to include. We wanted to know, so of the people that are going to enroll and register into summer program, how many of them are actually going to show up? We built a very specific summer school war room, and my administrative team were housed out of the ABE offices where I live in the summer, and they were assigned to different grade levels. That administrative team supported teachers and students by being the ones that contacted parents when students hadn't logged in. Teachers were only responsible to teach. We took care of all the administrative duties and make sure that students showed up. And if you take a look at the numbers, what you will see is we had a very high level of active students in every week that attended across the grade levels. And so that was something that we were very surprised to see, but it told us that we were being successful in how we were supporting teachers and students and families and getting them to class. We always do very significant surveys of our summer school and our after school programs. We not only do student surveys, we do parent surveys, and we do staff surveys. I've included the K7 program student survey feedback here. These are just a couple of the comments. One of my favorite comments was the student that indicated that, I really like when my teacher helped me because she helps me not quit when it's hard. And Dr. Battle attended a class or two this summer, and she can tell you that teachers really had those high expectations for students and really went out of their way to support them. The other thing we focus on in after school and in summer is teaching math and ELA, literacy, through science, through experiments, through hands-on, standards-aligned, engaging curriculum. In terms of the parent survey feedback, we received a lot of really positive feedback. We received almost no negative feedback. And I think this was in large part because of that war room that we established around our administrative team supporting families and students with any questions they needed. I can't tell you how many hotspots and Chromebooks we delivered to people's homes, showed them how to use them, made sure that the parents understood and the students understood so that they could hop on, they could attend classes. I also want to make sure to thank Rachel Gorton and the technology team. Without their assistance this summer, building that plane as we were flying it, we would have never had some of these results. One of the pieces of feedback, I actually know the parent who gave that last comment there, although this is an anonymous survey, they actually did type their name into the survey. And I can tell you that this parent does have high expectations of our school district, of our staff, and of their children. And so I was really pleased to receive that feedback from them. You can see from the summer program survey feedback from students that most students felt like they had a really good experience. Did you like summer school? A very high percentage of students indicated that they did. How much do you think you learned? And even a higher percentage indicated that they learned a lot. And did the teacher make things fun for you? And that's really what we try to do in the summer. We would try to make learning fun because we can try some out of the box things. In terms of the parent feedback, we had about 60 parents provide feedback. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive. Anything higher, anything as a 3 or higher is something that is quite positive. And we feel like we're living in the 4s and 5s. And based upon the fact that honestly, we didn't know how it all was going to go this summer. Getting those types of responses from parents, I can tell you our team met and reviewed every single response from students, parents, and staff, and we were overwhelmed with that. We also did include a question around parents, like, why did you register? And there was a large number of parents that registered because they felt like in the spring, how work was pushed out to them, because that's how we were able to do it in the spring. They really wanted more time with the teacher. They wanted more time. Students wanted to see their classmates, and they were able to do that in the summer. And with the support of the CISA department, we were able to help pilot some of these features and sort of be the guinea pig, so that in the fall, they could take some of what we did and learned to help implement learning even better for students. In terms of the 6th, 7th grade student summer feedback, that's here. Did you like the STEM science class? Again, we continue that STEM science theme through middle school. Students overwhelmingly like that approach. We did learn 4 main lessons, and these lessons were obviously shared with the executive leadership team, and I want to thank personally the executive leadership team. We didn't know if we were going to have summer school. The timetable that was given was very short, and MDE didn't give us much time to get ready for it, and the parameters and constraints around how we could offer it were challenging. And so we learned first that making sure that we have a consistent schedule for students to show up, that was important, that had to be sort of carved in stone. The second is we had a massive effort with my team to create the curriculum, order all the materials, put all of the materials into one bag, including Chromebooks, and do multiple pickup opportunities for students to pick up the necessary materials to learn. This included simple things like pencils and paper, but also included all the materials and resources for the science experiments that they were doing. The third piece is that our curriculum team of 191 staff developed different grade level hands-on science-based curriculum. We did that because we wanted students to be active in their learning. We wanted them to advocate for themselves, and that was something that students and parents alike both called out in the surveys. And finally, Rachel Gorton and her team supporting us in supporting the families to make sure they had the materials that they needed in order to access classes. We're very fortunate tonight. There are 2 teachers who are joining us this evening. Ashley Gravink from Vista View Elementary School. She was a kindergarten teacher in summer, and Leanne Blondes, who's a Nicollet Middle School special education teacher, was a 6th grade teacher in the program. And I am going to stop sharing my screen so that everybody can see them, and that they can share with you what they feel their experience and student experience were in summer.
Hi, I am Ashley Gravink. This year I am teaching kindergarten at Vista View Elementary. Last year I was kindergarten at Sioux Trail, and before that I was at Sky Oaks in 4th and in 2nd grade. So I've kind of been all over the place. Thank you for inviting me tonight. I don't normally teach summer school. In fact, I haven't taught it since 2006, so it's been a while. But I decided to teach it this summer for many reasons. But the one that intrigued me the most was that it would be virtual. I could speak for a long time about how awesome summer school was, but I'll try to make it somewhat short for you. First of all, Jason had a team of teachers who developed the summer school curriculum, which made planning for summer school a breeze. He also had staff to help contact and communicate with parents and families when it was necessary. Secondly, I was placed as a teacher for 15 kindergartners going into 1st grade. 13 of those were students I knew from Sioux Trail, which made building relationships and connections with them virtually much easier. Thirdly, each student received a curriculum kit, which had everything in it that my summer school students needed, including paper packets of learning worksheets and other activities, Play-Doh, glue sticks, pencils, and even freezies for a project. I was so nervous about teaching kindergartners online. The distance teaching and learning we did in the spring was okay, but many of us worried that we weren't really meeting the needs of our students. The prospect of teaching online was intriguing, but I worried that I wouldn't be able to keep my kindergartners engaged in learning online for 2 hours every day. I quickly learned though that teaching online could be very similar to teaching in person. For example, just like in a classroom, students thrive on routines. We had morning meetings each day, we played learning games, and we created and followed online routines and schedules that made our sessions successful. I found that classroom management is just as important online as it is in person. I was still able to use things like my call and response, capiche, kaposh, and counting backwards 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0 to refocus my students' attention. Lastly, while in-person relationships and connections with students are really important, I learned that you can still create and maintain those relationships while teaching virtually. When a student shares online, they get the teacher's full attention without the typical interruptions that happen in a classroom. One thing that Dr. Battle didn't mention when she talked about visiting my classroom was that one of my students spilled her freezie when she was on her way to put it in the freezer for our liquids and solids project. She was crying and upset, and even though I couldn't physically hug her, I was able to use my online relationship with her to help her calm down and help her determine that we could work together with her parents to figure out a solution for the freezie. Most importantly, I learned that when we teach online, our students and their families are inviting us into their homes, which creates even stronger school-to-home relationships. I really enjoyed teaching summer school. It was planned out well, it was organized, and it was so eye-opening to have the experience that while virtual learning and teaching isn't what any of us want to do, it can be done well and learning can happen and be very effective. So Dr. Battle and the school board and Jason Sellers, thank you for inviting me to share my experience here tonight.
Okay, let's see. No. All right, is it my turn?
Yes, Leanne, we can hear you, but we can't see you.
Oh, I turned on the video. Oh boy. Were you able to see me earlier?
Yes, but we can hear you if you want to go.
Well, I will go. Maybe the video is lagging just a little bit.
We can see you now.
Okay, I'm on a landline, so I thought it would work a little bit better. All right, so thank you everybody for letting me share tonight. This was my fourth summer doing summer school, my second year under Jason's leadership. And I have to tell you that every year I've had a great experience, but the reason why I wanted to do summer school this past year was to really get good at being a digital teacher. During the school year, I'm a special ed teacher, so I have a lot of different responsibilities besides just teaching. And in the summer, I have the opportunity to do a lot more teaching, and I really, really love that. But what worked really well this past summer, and this just echoes a lot of what has already been shared, is the leadership of Jason and all the administration. Before we even got started, Jason was very open and he pulled the teachers together. He trusted us to give input on the structure and asked us of what would work well. And then I had the opportunity to develop my curriculum. So at the middle school level, it was a little bit different. It was my second year. I had the same curriculum. I jumped up a year with the age group, but we all put our heads together to figure out which kids we had the year before to make sure they had different curriculum. And then we developed curriculum that was very meaningful to the kids and also very interesting. So there is a lot of room there. What was fantastic is I had to have all of my summer prearranged, pre-planned, put together a syllabus, and then every family came and picked up hard copies. So the kids had the opportunity to do paper copies of work or the work online, and I put everything on Schoology. So they had both, and we were able to do that together. But the great part about that for me is that I had to plan in advance, and that was fantastic. It was mentioned that we had a lot of administrative support. Every single period, I had somebody in class with me, double checking my attendance. I put it in the computer, but then those phone calls home live during class letting parents know that their child was not logged in was fantastic. So I didn't have to worry about that. It was being done for me. Plus I had that other adult presence in the class, and it helped to provide more community. It was really, really wonderful. With the class structure, I was able to put together curriculum that was very functional for the students and interesting, but functional being that they knew up front that the things that they were going to do in the month that we were together were projects that they could take with them and use in the future. So we did a research project, we wrote an essay, we did a lot of different activities, and all this was their own work that they could use for future projects in other classes. And I think that meant a lot to them. A lot of the kids really put in the time. We met online every day, so we talked about the synchronous instruction. That was key. We were all starving for community last spring. And so when the opportunity came up in the summer, and I think that the kids I had were old enough that they knew that they were going to get credit for being there, for just being there, but they actually put in the effort, and there were kids doing work outside of class and had the most amazing projects that they shared, and essays that they wrote, and research that they did outside of our time together, even though as long as they showed up and they were trying, they knew that they would be successful. So this meeting online was critical to building community, but then building that community inspired the kids to work harder, to learn more, to build their skills and build their knowledge. Something that was very helpful for me as a teacher is we were not given parameters or requirements of what we had to do for our Schoology pages. I was a little nervous about that at first. I wanted to become really, really proficient at Schoology. And I thought, this is my perfect opportunity, and I'm going to invest all this time so I really have a good handle on it. And then I wasn't required to load up a whole lot of information for these kids. We did all of the assignments together, but I was able to keep the pages very simple and easy to follow. So the kids had an opportunity to be successful and know that they could be successful. It wasn't overwhelming. I work with 6th graders at Nicollet, and sixth grade is very hard, and they're moving from they're using Schoology for the first time, going from Seesaw to Schoology, and most of these kids, I walk around the classrooms that I co-teach in, and they don't even understand where to check their missing assignments or their grades. And there's so many amazing, elaborate videos and projects and things on all of these Schoology pages that the kids, it's just a little bit overwhelming. So what I really tried to do is keep it simple in the summer and interesting, but not overwhelming. And I think because of that, the students really felt like they could be successful. Let's see, what else? Oh, the relationships and expectations that I had with the students. I think what was key is that the students knew that I wanted them to be successful. And as long as they were there and trying, they were going to find success. And I feel very, very confident in saying that every single one of the students I work with felt that way by the time that our summer school session was over. When I put assignments up, I allowed them to have choices of what they could do, different opportunities to do, and they could do things on paper or online. They did it on paper. They could send me a picture or just hold it up to the screen. I also really wanted the kids to present and work in groups, and they had those opportunities. And I think that everybody's at a different level. So I had students that didn't want to stop talking and that had their cameras on all the time and that were sharing all the time. And then there were kids that were terrified to turn their cameras on. So something that I did was I would give them extra credit or forgive some assignments if they turned their cameras on to participate. And that seemed to help a lot. And they had a lot of different opportunities in how they were working for each of these assignments. And then I remember I had one boy, and I still to this day, I don't know what he looks like because he just he sent me an email, and we ended up talking after the class on Zoom. He was terrified to turn on his camera. He wanted to present, but it was just a huge barrier for him. So we worked together and he shared his stuff and I read what he wrote. And I think by the end of the summer, he felt like, man, he just got another step closer to feeling confident on camera in front of others. And yeah, I can't say thank you enough for the opportunity to teach, to be part of this. I feel like the summer was a success because there was just so much support and everybody felt like there was an opportunity to get something out of it and then to be together. So that synchronous learning was just huge and wonderful.
The last slide of the presentation I won't present because I think it's probably a little bit more worthwhile to allow board members to potentially ask questions of the two teachers. I would just like to say two things to end. The first is I have an amazing team and they come back every summer, and every summer we have gotten better and better. You know, last summer we had around 1,500 students in our program. This summer we had around 1,100, and with COVID, that's saying something, and it was a different type of summer program. But I think if you were to look in detail at the student surveys, the staff surveys, and the parent surveys, you're going to see a lot of really great positive information. The second thing is just like every single other summer since I've been here, we were able to generate more revenue than cost. So none of our programs, K-12, cost the district any money. And with that, I'd just like to thank the executive leadership team for being able to be here, Board Chair Alt, and the other board directors. If you have any questions, we'd love to take them.
So Chair Alt, I have several more topics for my COVID-19 report. So at this time, if the board would like to ask Jason or our teachers some questions, and then we'll move on.
I think that makes sense. Yes.
No
Board
comments?
members, let's see. I see Director Chester's hand is up.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's more just a note of thanks. My daughter participated in the summer program this year in summer school. She had a really good time. The first day was a bit overwhelming because she was going into second grade and having to go from to a Chromebook and go on to Zoom and do synchronous learning. I think the model that was set up for the summer really helped prepare her and other students in elementary school for what was going to be expected in the hybrid model for distance learning, because she knew, she was an expert in Zoom by the time, after the end of the 4 weeks, and had a wonderful time. She loved the not only having the Chromebook, but the here's what's going to happen in week 1 packet. Here's the packet for week 2. Let's look at what's coming up for week 3. She really enjoyed being a part of that. And I enjoyed having her participate in it. And in addition, another big thanks needs to go out to the many teachers in our community ed programs for Project Kids and the childcare settings, because my daughter was also in the summer Project Kids program, and to have the benefit of staff helping guide her on her days there while in summer school was a huge benefit, and complimented for as me as a parent, being able to help her when she was home on other days. So thank you. It was a wonderful opportunity, and it didn't feel like you were building the plane while you were flying it. So
Thank you, Director Chester. Director Schatz, I believe you were next.
Can I quickly just piggyback off of what she said? As a teacher, the Project Kids staff were amazing in helping out the students that were in Project Kids. They found quiet spaces for them. They made sure that their Chromebooks were working and they had headphones and everything that they needed. And if they forgot something at home, they quickly found paper or something that they could use instead. So I just wanted to piggyback off of that and say Project Kids was fantastic in helping out on their side of it.
I raised my hand.
Ms. Blons, did you want to add something?
I did. I was looking for the raise the hand button. Sorry.
I heard you.
I just wanted to say too, also, Thank you. I have two daughters too. One of them is sitting next to me in this office, and they both are in Project Kids even now. And they're going to Sioux Trail on Mondays and Tuesdays, and they're at Gideon Pond on Thursday and Friday. And I just have to echo all of that. They've had so much help, and it's been so rewarding. They were also in summer school, so they were doing their classes while I was teaching. And I can attest to the numbers going up from parent-teacher conferences that we just had last week. My little daughter next to me, she went from being at about a 30% in math on the national scale up to 65%. And that, I mean, it's a big jump. Both of them are making a lot of progress in their reading. But I mean, that was fantastic to hear, because I'm on one end of it as a teacher, and then I get to hear the other side as a parent. So both everything that happened for summer school and Project Kids has been amazing and supportive.
Thank you. Dr. Schatz.
First, thank you, Jason, and to you too, for coming tonight and giving this report. It's, once again, I am blown away by what we do, not even just in the summer, but for our kids day in and day out. But this is the very definition of a program that is set up to make everybody succeed, from the students to the staff to the teachers, everybody, the families, everybody. And so that is no small accomplishment. And the fact that you felt like you were, as you said, building the plane as you were flying it, flying the plane as you're building it. Again, well, either way, it's a bad situation, but it sounded like you pulled it off with amazing success. And if you have families and students who have as much positive feedback as you do teachers that are participating in the program, that really says a huge amount. So thank you all for all the work that you've done.
Thank you, Director Schatz. Director Courier.
Yes, thank you. Hats off to our community education department. If, in my opinion, it's the best in the state of Minnesota. So thanks to our community education department that we have these kinds of programs. And Jason and the teachers who both came tonight and who taught this summer, I'm a former teacher, and of course my yardstick is longer than some of your yardsticks in terms of measurements of what we are doing with students. I can't believe, I mean, it's amazing to me what we do with students now, but the program this summer will certainly help teachers this fall as we go into distance learning. We have a better handle on it now than we did in the spring when all of a sudden it happened. I was very impressed with the reports this evening. So congratulations to a job well done. It was amazing. So I very much appreciated the report. And that's my comment. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Courier. Any other comments? No. I had just a couple. In terms of the positive feedback, I know there were conversations that I had with families out in the community and heard student stories about their experience in summer school, and it exactly relates to the positive feedback, Jason, that you shared in your report, and the exuberance and enthusiasm of the parents and the students. It really, it was really reassuring, and it was great to know that, and I appreciate hearing Ms. Gravink and Ms. Blondes from you both about what a great experience it was for you, because we know how important summer learning is for our students, and to have the level of, I think Director Schatz mentioned it, everybody's successful. There's positivity. You feel supported, both the adults and the students. And I'll be curious, Jason, to see how this, this past summer's experience might translate into next summer's experience, regardless of whether we're still dealing with COVID or not. I know that you and your team are very creative, and I don't want to ask you the question now. I'm just putting it out there, that we'll be looking forward to seeing what happens. And I guess just one question for both Ms. Gravink and Ms. Blons. Is there some, Ms. Gravink, you mentioned, the carrot and the stick method of getting students to turn their cameras on, with, I think it was you that mentioned, giving, encouraging students to turn their cameras on. Is there have you already started sharing? Is there some mechanism for you to share? I mean, because I think what I'm hearing is, kind of a lead conversation that you both as summer school teachers could have with colleagues in terms of, this is, the collective learning, this is what we learned, and oh, by the way, this worked for me.
Go ahead, Leanne, because that was you.
Oh, okay. That was me. So what I would do is I was giving extra credit. I just laughed because, these kids, they were trying, and I was telling them percentages, but I'm pretty sure as kids going into 8th grade that they knew that they were going to pass the class and that the grade was not a factor in their GPA. But I did, I think we were telling them that they had to turn their cameras on to participate, but I know that we can't really say that, but I gave extra credit, or I forgave a missing assignment, a small one, like a bell ringer or something like that. I just would excuse them in the grade book, and then they would see their grades go up just by turning on their cameras and participating. And I think that would be a great conversation to have with other teachers. Right now, as a 6th grade teacher, I have to say I've got amazing participation. The kids are all turning on their cameras and they want to hang out and they are talking and everything. And I don't see that with the kids as they get a little bit older. I see a lot of muted microphones and cameras off, and it just really breaks my heart because, it goes hand in hand, I think, with effort and just, really being part of a community. So I do think it warrants a conversation.
And I guess I'm looking to see, Mia, I don't want to put you on the spot if you're here. Are you here? Yes. In terms of the learning from, from summer, and maybe Teresa, this is a better question for you, how are we translating the what's been described by our teachers into learning for the larger group?
Well, actually, Chair Alt, the 4 learnings that Jason shared with you, they actually were embedded in our launch for this fall's instruction. So for example, we're continuing to see the importance of providing materials. And as we have now moved to distance learning for middle and high school, we do have teams of principals and teachers taking a look at that. So yes, those 4 learnings, primarily the synchronous learning was, as the teacher shared, was really key. And so some surrounding districts, they are still in asynchronous, and we've been hearing there's a big difference by having a set time in our district.
And I think as we built our distance learning 2.0, we really did learn from the experiences and the successes of the summer. There were many people, including people at MDE, who said, well, first graders can't be on a Zoom for 45 minutes. That's insane. But these teachers have just said it works and how well it works. And they really, it really helped us roll out that synchronous connection. And our teachers are saying that is part of what keeps our kids connected to the teachers and to each other, to the students. I think the supplies and providing kits for students is another lesson learned. We have our elementary art and music teachers who have put together kits for students during distance learning. So all students will get the kit and they will use those materials for their lessons for art and music. Middle school electives, facts, and other areas have put together kits for each unit for the students to pick up, and they are using those at home. And I think the excitement that Jason described about kids getting their kit and looking at it and then working together online to complete the tasks, we're super successful, and we want to help replicate some of that. So every student will get a distance learning kit. Every student will get the art and music kits with just some of those things that we can continue to update. So yes, we really built 2.0 based on the success of these teachers and the experiences, and tried to learn the lessons of things that didn't work very well. So
awesome. Thank you all.
Chair Alt, I
very
can
much.
probably respond. I can probably respond to the question you had about next summer. In cooperation with the executive leadership team, we're getting ready to launch BYC and PALS now that looming in the horizon could potentially be an all distance learning district. Once that happens, we are getting ready right now to be able to launch. And so launching in January for BYC and PALS after school targeted services, everything that we are doing for those two programs is based upon what we did this last summer. They'll be essentially mirror programs. Both what we did learn and some of the things that we know that we did well and areas that we can get better.
Awesome. That's great to hear. Thank you. Thank you all presenters. This has been a great portion of our COVID report, first chapter. And we'll just look forward to another update after next summer. Thank you. And we'll turn it back to you, Dr. Battle.
Thank you. So it was really important for us to start off with that very hopeful, energized, successful presentation of what we did in the summer, because the next part of my report will be sobering. And so today we did receive from Minnesota Department of Health the latest confirmed cases for Dakota County and Scott County. So Dakota County has 49.35 and Scott County has 60.75. And it is expected that next Thursday's report will once again indicate increased case numbers. The recommended options for learning model based on these 14-day case rates is elementary and middle, high school, and distance learning. As you know, last week I announced that middle and high school students would transition to a distance learning model as of November 19th. Due to planning days for staff, there will be no school November 16th or 18th for middle and high school students, including those enrolled in 191 Virtual Academy. These changes include Burnsville Alternative High School and the BEST Transition Program. I do want to share a bit about the required part of a district decision-making process, and that is a mandated consultation meeting with our state-assigned regional support team. Bianca Vernig, our regional team coordinator, met with the COVID-19 advisory team on Friday, October 30th, and explained the key questions that guide the consultation visit. First, we are to use county case data and school district data in concert. The team would ask us, are you seeing transmission in a specific grade, school, and/or activity? Step 2, is there community spread? Look at the percent of positive cases as an indicator of community spread, and 5% is the threshold. Step 3, what are the key aspects of the implementation of the new learning model? And so as we thought about transitioning middle and high school to a distance learning model, we met with the team on Tuesday, November 3rd. Staff and I presented responses to those questions. The regional support team members included a Minnesota Department of Health consultant, Dakota and Scott County Public Health epidemiologists and nurses, and the Minnesota Department of Education staff. During the consultation meeting, staff and I used the key indicators from our 1029-20 learning model key indicators, and Aaron Tinklenberg will share the screen to show you that dashboard, which is a decision-making graphic. And so you see that we look at 4 areas in our decision-making process of what is the best learning model for our schools. So health, academic, staffing, and safety. And to the right, you will always see the latest county numbers. And so this learning model indicator and dashboard decision-making process is on our website. We also at the meeting had to share our local data. And so also on our website, you will see another dashboard which shows the number of confirmed cases, students and staff that we have over a 14-day period, as well as the number of students and staff quarantined. At that time with the regional consultant team, we did share for the week ending October 31st. And so this has been updated for November 7th. Right now we have, since ending November 7th, we have 3 students active cases, 1 staff. The number of those who have COVID impacts are 137 for students, 49 for staff, and cumulative cases since September 1, 31 and 17 that are still in that status. And so all of that information is shared with the regional consultation team, and then they ask us questions. And so in response to those questions, we did share what we were thinking about based on the dashboard, and the regional support team shared that our plan to move secondary to distance learning was a plan they would support. Also, our COVID advisory team also recommended it would be a plan they would support. With today's numbers, with the new cases of COVID-19 on the rise in our community, and after consulting with local health officials and our COVID-19 advisory committee, I will, at a meeting tomorrow, unfortunately, the regional team is so busy, the earliest that I could get a consultation meeting is tomorrow at 12:30. And so at that time, I will be sharing with them that even though our students and families, pre-K through 12, have done a terrific job adhering to the health and safety protocols, we must realize we are not immune to what is happening in the community. So tomorrow I will share a plan for pre-kindergarten and elementary students to transition to distance learning due to continued case rate increases. The plan will be shared with our COVID-19 advisory team too. Please note that the hybrid model created in August was designed to facilitate the move to and from distance learning. Consistent with the design of the model, the transition to distance learning necessitates specialists who were assigned to teach small pods will move to their original assignments. The purpose of the small pods of 12 to 18 students was to provide safe in-person classrooms that adhere to all health and safety protocols. This means that as part of a transition to distance learning at the elementary level, some students will move from their specialist pod teacher to their previously assigned classroom teacher or a new teacher. We know this is not ideal, and this may be challenging for some students and families. Principals and teachers will utilize the remaining time in person to prepare students for this move. Pending our consultation with regional support, the last day of in-person instruction as part of the hybrid model for elementary students, I will recommend being Tuesday, November 24th. Assuming our consultation agrees, our first day of elementary DL will be December 3rd, and we would have planning days for staff November 30th, December 1st, and 2 to support this transition. So there will be no school for elementary students, including preschool. Grade level teams have worked collaboratively, as you've heard from our summer school staff. our teachers, administrators, support staff do work collaboratively. And so this will continue as we move forward. We will also work to provide interactions and opportunities for students and teachers across grade levels so students are familiar with other teachers. During the transition to distance learning, we will have an opportunity for the new teacher to connect with and start building a relationship with students before class starts. We believe this is best, and moving to full distance learning will have the following features: opportunity to support all students with multi-tier systems of support and service supports lost when we had to utilize the specialists, teachers to support pods. It will also allow all students to have access to resources and district What I Need services. EL services for English language learners will be more consistently available, and our services for advanced learners, our gifted and talented learners, will also be more accessible. There will be a common district schedule for greater inclusion of our virtual academy, and we will create class lists and staff assignments to transition more easily. Lastly, this will reduce the class size disparities between distance learning and virtual academy. Some of our virtual academy teachers have had class sizes up to 40 students. Both teachers and parents have asked for some support for that. We did hire 3 teachers, but with the demand in hybrid, it has become unsustainable. We have excellent teachers, as you've seen tonight, from the 2 who shared their story about their summer school experience. And though not ideal, I am confident that our teachers and our support staff and administrators will approach this transition for students with the utmost care and professionalism. My staff and I will continue to monitor the case rates, and I please implore everyone, whether or not the rates increase or decrease depends on our behavior. We must follow the health precautions and safety measures. MDE has a minimum of 2 weeks when you transfer to a distance learning model, and our public health staff recommends that we extend that to 2 incubation periods. So you're looking at a total of 6 weeks. Therefore, a possible return for both middle and high school and elementary students would happen after winter break. But we will update you. We will look at the case numbers. We will look at what's happening locally. A transition at the elementary level will mean some changes in childcare and meal service. Community education is planning for those changes. An exciting development that was shared with the board previously, that they were developing a program for middle school students. And so we will have more information in the coming days after I meet with the regional support team and the COVID advisory committee. Community meal distribution will be expanded as students won't be able to get meals during the school day. For technology, we do have inventory, but it may not be exactly what staff members or some families want. Unfortunately, because of such the demand for distance learning at this time, we cannot get any new orders in. And so it's a national issue to get new learning devices. We do have hotspots, and a program was recently announced by Dakota County Libraries that makes Chromebooks and hotspots available. So here we are again with that community strong. It will take all of us as we make this transition. So I know this is not the news that any of us wanted to hear, but I still believe strongly, as we have shown since last spring, we will get through this together, and that we will continue learning and growing as a community. We've shown amazing resilience, creativity, innovation, and support of each other. And we've shown great care for our students and our neighbors. I am so proud to be a part of this community and thankful for every one of you. And so our last presentation tonight as part of the COVID-19 report many people are wondering about our plan for activities and athletics. And so Assistant Superintendent Brian Gersich has been convening a group to review plans for extracurricular activities. In addition, on Monday, November 9th, I participated in a meeting for the South Suburban Conference superintendents. Our nurses attended, and I thank our lead practical nurse, Bernadette Bean is here, Bernie Bean, as well as the athletic directors, because we understand we as a conference need to be clear that health and safety comes first and to have a clear plan about activities and sports. And so tonight, Jay Lepper, Burnsville High School Assistant Principal, and Guillaume Peck, Director of Athletics, will present our plan for winter activities. And Brian Gersich will join them also. I'll turn it over to them. Thank you.
Chair Alt, directors, thank you guys for allowing us to come and speak with you. Before we start sharing our slideshow, I just want to make a slight note to you all that, some of this information is actually outdated just based on how fluid this COVID has been and this pandemic has been. And so I just want to make you aware that there are some slides that have been moved around a little bit in order to make the presentation flow a little bit more smoothly as opposed to breaking and cutting back and forth. So I just wanted to apologize in advance that it's the exact same slides, but it is just a little bit of a different order in the first couple of slides. So having said that, I'd like to first thank the other South Suburban Conference athletic directors and activities directors. Who've done a fantastic job in collaborating. Our system is extremely similar to those surrounding districts that make up the South Suburban Conference. And so, this is the big question right now, I think, for districts as they're making these decisions during this pandemic. There's a lot invested in athletics and activities. Just want to say that there's definitely a social and emotional benefit for our students to stay engaged, even as they're transitioning into distance learning, as well as the mental health component of our student athletes and our participants in activities. Mental health has been a huge issue or a huge concern for some of our young folks during this pandemic.
Yeah, and I also wanted to echo that the safety protocols that are implemented with more fidelity in our programs within the school than non-school programs that our students might enter into without the option of in-school activities or sports.
Yep, and kind of touching off of Jay's point, there's that fine line about offering, athletics continually in districts and at high schools, and it actually can potentially help limit the spread, because kids will be staying and playing locally at their schools relatively in the same pods in the same communities, as opposed to sort of jumping out into AAU programs or club programs, which several have been traveling all over the state currently. So
yeah, our fall sports and activities had low positive numbers, COVID-19 positive cases, and we believe that was in a great deal in part to our very strict COVID plans that were put in place and approved by our district health team, and then obviously adherence to those protocols as well.
Yep, and then one of the other final points, Jay's going to wrap this slide up here in a second, but one of the other pieces to really think about when balancing this, or one thing that we discussed and thought about, was the equity piece, where the students who didn't necessarily have the financial resources wouldn't have the opportunity. Those who had the financial resources would continue on and find that opportunity to play and participate, through those club programs and those AAU programs. So
Yeah, and I, just to piggyback off that, Mr. Pack, when other options don't exist, we've found that our students are going to find these other options to play, wrestle, in other programs like AAU, Pinnacle, AAA hockey. And those other programs do not provide the same guidance and oversight as our school does, the Minnesota State High School League does, and the South Suburban Conference does. And so we really feel like if students are going to participate, we feel that our students are safer participating in the Burnsville High School programs than programs outside of our school.
All right, we're going to move on. So first, a brief update on fall sports and activities as we transition into distance learning. So currently, the only two fall sports it was kind of that compressed second fall season. What we'd like to do is we'd like to continue fall sports until its natural conclusion. Volleyball has their first section game November 30th. We'd like to see them continue on as they have been until they're eliminated in sections or win section. And then again, as stated before, football, we actually had to pause. And so unfortunately their season ended today prior to their first section game next week.
And then as far as activities are concerned, the fall activities that we had, drumline has ended, fall play has ended, debate will end in December. And we've had other activities that are considered full year activities such as Student Council, Link Crew, National Honor Society, DECA, and there are many student interest clubs, and those are all done in a virtual nature only. And then some of our fall activities like I just mentioned, debate, is I would consider that hybrid. They do some virtual practices and some in-person practices. All of their competitions are virtual, but we do have a few students coming into the school on Saturdays for competitions. When I say a few, 4 or 5, they're put in separate rooms so that they can use our internet that is that they can trust that during the competition they won't have any technical issues. And so we've had the debate coaches coming in with those 4 or 5 students on Saturdays. But for the most part, activities have been able to, the majority of our activities have been able to function in a virtual or a hybrid manner.
Yeah. And then, just kind of wrapping up that slide real quick, they are adhering to all the fall activities and athletics have submitted COVID preparedness plans that have been vetted and approved by our health professionals in the building. And we're making sure that implementation is happening. So we feel pretty good about that. So just sort of a brief overview, and this is, I think, kind of where we deviate a little bit from the slide deck. So again, apologies. So a decision will be made at least weekly on Thursday afternoon. So there's a group of us, we're calling it the ISC 191 Athletics and Activities COVID Response Team. It's made up of some of the health professionals in our district. It's made up of building administration, district administration. And really what we're doing is we're taking a look at the trifecta of data and really kind of looking at that scalpel approach that Governor Walz has mentioned, where we're taking a look at county numbers, we're taking a look at zip code and boundary numbers, and we're also taking a look at individual school numbers as well and district numbers to try to figure out where we're at and whether it's safe to continue on, whether we need to hit the pause button, whether we can open up a little bit more. And so this is sort of the overview, and we're going to kind of dive deep a little bit into it here in a second. But, the second bullet point really just kind of talks about, who we are and who we're listening to while we're making this decision. Jay, you want to take this one or you want me to?
Go ahead if you want to. I can take it as well.
All right. So it's a 6 dial. It's actually a 7-point system. So it's a dial from 0 to 6. 0s being the most restrictive, and each, as far as the dial opens and turns more towards the 6, the less restrictions that we have. And so we felt that it was important to take that look at the data from the previous week on those Thursdays when those K-12 numbers come out. Thursday is also the day that the Minnesota State High School League has their weekly lead network meeting, so we get guidance from them. And then we also have our now weekly South Suburban Conference Athletic Directors meeting that we meet directly after the high school league lead network meeting, so we can discuss the new information and figure out how we can make those changes as a conference, and then sort of try to figure out where we can find that alignment in our own districts.
Yeah, and I would also add, it's important to note, and Dr. Battle made an excellent point with moving from fully in-person learning or hybrid or fully distance. And we have a plan in place in our district to move up and down that dial. So on this particular dial for activities and athletics, it's designed so that you may move up or down the dial based on COVID data, guidance from our district, MDH, MDE, the high school league, and then also the team decision that Guillaume had just talked about from our own weekly team meetings.
All right. Jay, this is you, bud.
Yeah, so this slide basically just shows the winter activities that have already begun. Some of them have started or are going to start. And so some great examples of the winter activities that we have, and some are virtual only, such as Science Quiz Bowl, Math League, Quiz Bowl. Those are virtual only. When I say virtual only, I mean practices and competitions. And then some are, again, what I would consider hybrid or in-person as far as the practices or rehearsals go. But for the most part, all of them have a performance component or competitive component that either is fully virtual or can be fully virtual. And some examples of those that are going to start or have started for the winter season are the competition one-act play, robotics, which has begun, speech, mock trial, which has begun, and winter drumline that has begun as well. And then we talked about the dial system, and Guillaume is going to go through the dial system pertaining to athletics, but we put together a separate dial system for activities and fine arts. And the performing arts and activities dial was different. We felt like it was important to have a different dial because activities and fine arts are so different in general in physical nature and or physical exertion or proximity of the particular fine art activity compared to athletics, also the venue, and then also the fact that I mentioned that for fine arts and activities, they can almost completely have virtual competitions or performances without in-person interaction with those from other schools. So we felt like from fine arts activities perspective, we could maintain that almost completely. Whereas athletics, when Guillaume goes through the dial, you see that's a little bit different with the competitions when you have to play another team in basketball or hockey or wrestling, Nordic skiing, those types of sports. I mean, you're with the other team playing them. You can't do that virtually in a competition. And so if you look at this, if you look at 0 on the dial, that means everything is virtual. There's no in-person practices, there's no in-person meetings or rehearsals. That is completely virtual. And at dial number 1, there's no singing or dancing allowed, but there is some in-person meetings, rehearsals, practices allowed for fine arts activities. They're allowed to walk through, for example, I put some examples down here, walking through blocking for the play, for example, and running dialogue, but distanced, socially distanced with masks on in the building. And that would be for all groups, pod sizes of 10, depending on the size of the area. If we're talking about classrooms, it would be 10 in each classroom at the most. And that includes the advisor. In other areas like our theater, you might have 2 pod sizes of 10, depending on where they're at within the Morass Center, just because of how large it is. And then with the athletics dial system, we've got 6, well, actually 7 counting the 0 dial. with athletics activities or fine arts and activities, essentially there's two less. So we've kind of grouped 2, 3, and 4 together, where groups are now allowed to practice. If they move up to that 2, 3, 4 dial, groups are allowed to practice and rehearse in small groups and pods not to exceed 25, though we can set that lower. You looked back at dial 1, that pod size cannot exceed 10. When you get to the next level up, that 2, 3, 4 cannot exceed 25, but it can be set lower. It can be set at 10 as well. It also allows groups at this level to engage in activities while practicing appropriate physical distancing, including use of masks. Also at this level, luckily, again, like I've stated, that almost all of the competitions and performances can be done virtually. This would allow those competitions to continue, and video recording options are available for future broadcast as allowed. And then again, appropriate social distancing with masks when singing of 12 feet or more. And once they move up to the dial number 5, now we would allow group performances maintaining pod distancing and allowing performing to a small audience. And the size of the audience would be determined based on spacing and measurements of facility and other guidance factors that are given to us by district, MDH, MDE, the high school league, and so forth. So the big difference here is that you're starting to have, when you get to 5, a small audience allowed. And then when you get up to 6, dial 6, that's essentially allowing for full practices, full rehearsals, performances with full audiences. And so that would be the highest level that you could potentially reach at some point. So that's our winter activities fine art style. And now I'm going to turn it over to Guillaume to go through the athletics.
And Mr. Pack, will you just give an overview, please, of the sports? Because it's very similar with the dials. Thank you.
Yep, I sure can. So just essentially athletics are going to be grouped into 2 groups. The first group is the one that can really do the individual component and doesn't need to really have face-to-face direct contact with an opposing team. Those are listed there for you. The way that we're structuring dance team competitions, we're going to be filtering students into the gym to perform, and then they're leaving immediately. We're planning on doing virtual swim meets for our swim and dive. Olympic and power are virtual. And then we kind of get into the group 2, which is more of the face-to-face direct contact, the adaptive floor hockey, basketball, hockey. And then if we decided to shift to boys swim and dive in-person meets, and then wrestling. And so, that's kind of where we're planning on deviating, like the individual components that can be done virtually or can be done within the same pod size that is our building and our students who are participating. And then the group 2 is sort of where we're face to face with other folks and either inviting other folks into our building or going to other schools. So like Dr. Battle said, our dials are very similar. However, it deviates a little bit in terms of crowd size and who can have competitions, what the restrictions are. I don't know, do you want me to cover those, or do you want me just give me cruise through them, Dr. Battle?
Yeah, if Mr. Tinklenberg can go through and just show an overview.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Yep. So the 0 again is like the virtual coaching, no in-person meetings or practices or competition. The number 1, next slide, Jay, is essentially in person, but it's individual skills and drills only. So students are not competing or scrimmaging against each other. They're not bodying up against each other on the basketball court. They're not checking each other in the hockey rink. They're not clasping and holding while they're kicking in dance. It is very much skill-based, condition-based, no real competitive component to it. Then you get to the 2. where group 1 is allowed to compete with no spectators, and then outdoor limited spectators. Group 2 is still not allowed to compete. At a 3, you have, sorry, I'm trying to go fast. Group 3, there's a little bit less restrictions. You know, group 2 is allowed now to have full team practices and have competitive activity and inter squad scrimmages and practice. That's where you kind of start to get back to a little bit more of a normal practice. Group 4, or if we're at a 4, you know, limited spectators indoors and outdoors for group 1. And then group 2, if we're at a 4, then hockey, basketball, wrestling can compete, but with no spectators. And then, you know, as we get to 5 and 6, it just opens up more and more. And so that's the plan. One kind of piece to note is that we will continue to monitor the success of this plan, and adjustments will be made as needed. You know, if we have programs that spike, or we have a lot of kids that have, you know, some potential exposures, then we'll kind of modify. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pack and Mr. Lepper. Board members, I have one more thing to add. I forgot to mention for the elementary transition to distance learning, their last day for hybrid would be Wednesday, November 25th, depending on what the regional support team says. And so more information will be coming out with details after my 2 Friday meetings. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone for your patience, and I'll turn it over to Chair Alt. Thank you, directors.
Thank you. Board members, I will open it up for questions and comments. Go back up. All right, Director Schatz.
I actually just want to say thanks for all the work and planning that's gone into this. It is not an ideal situation. That's an understatement for sure about with any of this, with athletics, activities, things like that. But I appreciate all the thoughtful planning that's gone into this. Certainly, as we see cases move up now, you know, caution is certainly our watchword, but I'm hopeful that within a very few short months, we're going to be able to dial things back up to normal activities. And it would be pretty exciting to end the school year very optimistically with those spring sports and activities back to relative normalcy. But thank you for all the work that's gone into this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Schatz.
Yeah.
Director Miller.
Yeah, again, thank you for the work you've done on this. Couple questions, or just verification, I guess, on the first part. You know, so I think you mentioned it, on the dial system for activities and sports. There'll be regular communications on where we stand. I think you said weekly you'll be meeting on that. Is that correct? And then I assume you'll be using sort of consistent language in that communication, along with maybe including the graphic on the dial or something like that, so people just understand, you know, what that means and what the next step would be after that, or if they had to fall back, what that would encompass. I think what people in the community lack the most is just they have a lot of uncertainty of where things are going to land and where they're going to be. And I know you can't predict that, but it'd be handy if they have an understanding that there is a good process in place and where we are in that process. So there was a question buried in there, just that the communication is going to be regular. Is that correct?
Yep, that's correct. So every Thursday after the MDH numbers come out, after the MSHSL Lead Network meeting, after our conference meeting, then this group will get together and we'll have discussions about where the dial should be set for fine arts and activities, and then where the dial should be set for group 1 and group 2, and then we'll be communicating that out weekly. We'll be communicating that out to coaches and reinforcing what the expectations are with restrictions or lack of restrictions if we're opening things back up, hopefully. And then we'll be communicating that out to the community as well.
And these are restrictions, this is laying sort of the environment out as a whole. But I expect, of course, if, as unfortunately happened with our football team with today or whatever, if you have an individual circumstances, you might have an individual sport or something that suddenly goes to no activity just due to the results of tests, right? But while others might still be performing or participating or whatever.
Yep, that's absolutely correct.
That could happen, right? Yeah. And then, competition by its nature requires a competitor. What do we know about the other, the people we would be competing against? Or is this a universal adoption, this system, or is this, how can we be assured that they're welcoming somebody in and not running our season by bringing them in to play them?
Yep. Before you answer, I will share that our regional support coordinator, Bianca Vernick, actually shared this out to both Scott and Dakota County, the dial. And so go ahead, Mr. Peck.
All right. Obviously, it's about mitigating risks, right? And making sure that we keep our students safe. And I can tell you, this dial is also being used in 196. It's being used, a similar dial is being used in Lakeville. I believe at our last South Suburban Conference meeting, Prior Lake is adopting a model of this dial. So, we have some uniformity, and I think just how often we've been connecting as athletics directors. It's the world that we're living in currently, where you have a plan, and then at 2:00 in the afternoon, you get a phone call and say, "Hey, we can't come and play football today, but I heard so-and-so is looking for a game." And so, I think we have a very good working relationship in our conference. And so, there are risks involved in participating in athletics. You are potentially putting yourself out there a little bit more, but I think the piece is that it's the choice. It's the decision of the family to see that and understand that, the Minnesota State High School League has a COVID-19 statement now in their mandatory paperwork for registrations. And so it really is about mitigating, and it's always, I think all of the ADs in our conference will act with an abundance of caution and will not jeopardize the potential season of other students if they know that they're potentially, they have a potential case.
All right, and I saw we kind of flew through the dial a little bit on the sports side, but are there elements of restricting usage of the locker rooms considered in there?
So those will all be laid out in our COVID preparedness plans. And so I've actually have most of them complete. The big question for us that I've been working with Dean at the Ice Arena at is trying to figure out what locker rooms look like in the city's facilities, and adhering to their rules.
I will tell you that youth hockey just sent a note out this evening that Burnsville and Apple Valley, they're closing their locker rooms, and skaters need to come fully dressed with minus skates and helmets. So yeah, it's and then that actually was adapted. I think it's New Prague was doing that not too long ago also. So yeah, I think, and I've heard people that I would have been a little bit surprised saying I don't understand why we're in locker rooms. That's I'd rather participate and dress in the car than be worried about a locker room. That's so.
And that's been a relatively consistent piece for us in the majority of our sports. We didn't have lockers for any of our fall sports, with the exception of football, just for the simple fact of, fleshing it out and thinking about it and actually seeking counsel from the high school league. Is it more dangerous for all the kids to pile up and throw all their equipment in the same trunk, and then you're potentially cross-contaminating the equipment. And so, football was the exception. For winter sports, we're going to be extremely restrictive with locker rooms as well. For wrestling meets, you kind of have to have a locker room space with weigh-ins and with skin checks. But there's also discussion of potentially having the athletic trainer at the home site do the weigh-ins and the skin checks before they go and do the weight certification, so then they can just show up and not have to go into another facility's locker room. So, the one piece with wrestling is the skin disease, and so the high school league is requiring us to offer showers for visiting competitors. Because with the issues of skin disease in wrestling, it's always important to shower after. So, we're working on it, but like I said, we're trying to be as restrictive as possible with our locker room spaces.
Thank you. Dr. Battle, a couple on your part, then a couple of observations and questions. So just so the community totally heard, because I mean, you read through a lot and I appreciate all that, but there will be some classroom disruption or teacher assignment disruption in our elementary structure, but for the most part, it's limited to where a specialist teacher was assigned to a pod for the hybrid model. We're now taking those specialists and putting them back to their original purpose as a specialist teacher, so they would be removed from that pod, and a more traditional, say, second, third, fourth grade teacher would be teaching that classroom. Did I understand that correctly?
Director Miller, it would not be limited because we are actually moving some of the virtual academies. So Amina off the dock can give you more details.
It really is focused for the most part on our K2 teachers. There will be most of the teachers who are assigned to virtual academy will stay in virtual academy, even if they were originally specialists. The only exceptions are going to be those around some licensure issues, because we did hire some new folks coming up. And so those would be the only changes, but the significant portion will be just the K2 teachers who were assigned a separate pod. That those are the ones that will be moving. The rest of the kids will stay with their classroom teacher.
So K2 kids that were, or teachers again, that were not by nature a K teacher or a first grade teacher or whatever, yes, who are now going back to being a special ed teacher, whatever they were doing. Mm-hmm. We would backfill that with a traditional first grade teacher that might have coming out of the virtual academy.
Right,
okay.
And because the because the pods are so small, that will help kind of narrow the gap between the class sizes that we're seeing with our full distance learning kids.
And then what do we anticipate? What do we anticipate with the buildings during this period of time? I anticipate there'll be some. So will these teachers that are teaching virtual, will some of them go in and use facilities to teach from there? Or are we anticipating they're all going to teach from their own home environment? And then I got to believe, well, what about special ed? There's got to be some things that require some one-on-one connection or in-person connection, correct?
The staff will have their classrooms and the buildings available to them. We have set a standard of what is required for teachers to teach virtually in terms of bandwidth and internet connection, as well as having a professional background, some of those types of things. And if they don't have any of those, or if they need support in any of those, the buildings are available for them to teach. The buildings also have their curriculum materials, and while they're welcome to take those home and teach remotely, the building is available for them to keep those materials there. When it comes to the idea that, the second half of your question, which seems to have escaped me now.
Special ed or
special
other
ed, that's right.
high touch need situations.
Right. So with special ed, we're starting with full distance learning, and then as we see the needs of students, we can bring those special populations back in. And I guess I would defer over to Stephanie White if she has any more specifics about how we're working with students with IEPs.
Mm-hmm. Good evening, board. All of our students on IEPs have a contingency learning plan that defines what their services will look like during distance learning. And as soon as the health and safety become better data for us in our community, then we will start to use, and we've developed with our regional SPED directors, some guidance, questions and guidance for our teachers, IEP teams to use in order to determine which students we would bring back and how we would support them under these conditions.
Thank you. Last question is for, I think, probably Lisa. Where does this put us with our transportation circumstances?
We are in the process of working with them. We are awaiting, the executive order did change things a bit for us this last round. However, we're waiting for a little bit more guidance on exactly how that needs to get coded and what is it that's going to be allowable when it comes to the maintenance of effort calculation and what's reimbursable for special education revenue. So once we're firm on that, we are in dialogue with the transportation company with regard to what that might look like, and we're working on that. At this point in time, only invoices that are in adherence to our current contract are what we are forwarding for payment.
Director Miller, the change in the last executive order, not the last, the one before.
Sorry.
2094. Previously, special ed transportation was not reimbursable. They changed that now we can. Is that the best way to describe that?
It was reimbursable for actual routes, right? But for charging special education transportation costs when the routes weren't actually taking place, that was what was not allowable previously, which is different from last spring.
Okay, thank you. That satisfies my questions.
Thank you, Director Miller. Any other questions or comments, board members? Okay, so I've got a couple questions. Probably Amina, possibly Stephanie, talking about going virtual and knowing that at the high school we have CTE classes across the district. We have English language learners, and we want to make sure that we're giving kids the opportunities that they need for learning in the variety of different ways that CTE and English language affect them. How is that going to work?
Sure. I'll start with CTE and then I'll address the English learners. When we're looking at how we're going to make sure people get some of those hands-on pieces, when we say the buildings will be available, many of our CTE staff will be conducting their classes and doing demos and labs from their classrooms because of the specialized equipment. They have been working with Kathy Funston since the beginning of the school year, especially some of those classes to shift them over to being virtual. In the middle school, all of the elective classes have been working, delivering virtually to all students. And then at the high school last spring, we really looked at bringing in individual students for certification and other types of things and doing those in ways that really met the health and safety. And so we'll continue with those practices because those were quite successful in the spring in giving kids opportunities. When we think about our English learners, one of the advantages of the shift in the transition to distance learning is about 50% of our elementary English learner ESL teachers were teaching classroom pods, and so they will move back into delivering service. Also, because of the health and safety protocols in the hybrid, even the students who were face-to-face were faced with huge barriers in terms of access to EL teachers. And so Actually, the move to distance learning will open up access for our English learners, and our ESL teachers will be part of the WIN teams, as well as being able to have more flexibility to pull kids across buildings as well to meet with them to address their language proficiency needs.
Thank you. And I just want to echo gratitude, Guillaume and Jay, both for all the thoughtful planning that's going into trying to keep our kids active and engaged and, you know, keep them safe. You alluded to it, and I just wanted to ask the question outright, knowing that there are members on your activities and athletics planning COVID team that are also on Dr. Battle's COVID advisory task force. Is there going to be intentional conversation linking those two groups, or is simply the membership? For instance, I'm sure Bernie will, or one of the nurses will be part of your task force. Is there going to be time? Are there going to be timed conversations based on the meeting of that district level group?
So Bernie can chime in also, Chair Alt and members of the board. So yes, Bernie and I have weekly meetings where we share the same data and analysis and have some process for decision making. So Bernie, did you want to add to that?
The two teams have to work together to keep everybody safe. There's no getting around that we can't have that communication together. We need that. Our students expect that from us. Our community deserves that from us. And so Courtney, who is the licensed school nurse at the high school, who has done an amazing job with all the COVID planning and keeping kids safe there, she's a key player and we work together. And so there'll be the communication that will happen for sure.
Great, thank you. And I guess, you know, with the best laid plans, I mean, we have, you know, staff district-wide planning for learning and activities and athletics so our kids can be safe. And Dr. Battle, reading into your, you know, your comments, we have about 6 weeks, right? We want our kids to be safe. We want our families to be safe. Ideally, it would be great to have the kids back in hybrid, and we're all in this together. You know, let's make safe choices and safe practices so that, you know, even if you don't have a child in school, community affects what happens in our schools, and we just want our kids back in school. So with that, thank you, everybody. Great report. Really informative as always. Next, we are turning to board member reports. Are there any reports that board members have individually? Nope. I have one announcement that does relate back to the previous report. You know, back earlier in the fall, we had the board had discussed that our meeting model will stay in alignment with the district learning model. And so at this point, all of our meetings will be virtual until the district-wide learning model changes back to hybrid. Meetings will obviously continue to be, as we're doing it tonight, accessible to our community through video. So we hope that folks will continue to join us and listen in. Committee reports, starting with Director Chester and the Policy Review Committee.
Yes, thank you, Chair Alt. The Policy Review Committee met on Tuesday. We reviewed a few policies, one being a brand new one that we'll be bringing forth in a future board meeting. And that concludes my report.
Great, thank you. Director Schatz with the Negotiations Committee.
There is no negotiation committee's report as the committee is currently inactive.
Great. Legislative Committee, Director Miller, in Director Hume's absence, is there anything to report?
No, there is no report for legislative committee as we have not met since our last meeting.
Okay. And Student Performance and Achievement Committee of the Whole. We are looking at having the first SPA report, I believe it was in January, we discussed in the officers meeting. Turning to board appointments and school appointments, do board members have any appointments reports?
I do.
Director Courier.
Yes. I'll start with the Association of Metropolitan School Districts. The November 6th meeting of AMSD had a program which was a recap of the November election and a preview and preparation for the 2021 legislative session. I urge you to go to the AMSD website and review the updated AMSD position papers on assessment, guns on school property, school employee health insurance, mandate reduction in local control, charter schools, tiered teacher licensure, and taxpayer subsidies for private K-12 education. There are papers on all of those in their positions. So that's on their website. And that concludes my report on AMSD. And my next report is on District 917, and it's somewhat parallel to the report we had on what's happening in our district. The Intermediate District 917 meeting was held this past Tuesday due to the election. Most of the agenda items were routine or to be expected. For example, the district is updating its policies and moving them to the MSBA numeric system. So the board approved several recommended changes. The one major new business item was a report by Superintendent Mark Suzik of changes to educational programming due to COVID-19. And here's the summary. Programs that are located in member district schools will follow the school schedules of the member district. The federal setting for programs at Alliance Education Center, Cedar School, Concord Education Center, and Lebanon Education Center, and the TESSA program located at the Dakota County Technical Center will transition to distant learning model. Their last day of hybrid model will be Friday, November 20th. For these programs, Monday, November 23rd, and Tuesday, November 24th, and Monday, November 30th, staff will be working to transition between the models. School will resume for students in distant learning model on Tuesday, December 1st. At minimum, this model will run through, now they're scheduling it through Martin Luther King Jr. holiday in January. The Dakota County Area Learning School sites and the Career and Technical Education Program will continue to operate in the hybrid model as they presently are. So there are small numbers that operate in their ALC models. So they're going to keep operating. The 917 website has been updated. I urge you all to check it out, both for the additional information about these schedule changes, but for general information about 917. So they're doing much of what we're doing. And that concludes my report, unless there's some questions on the 917 following what we're doing.
Any questions, board members? Nope. All right. Thank you very much, Director.
You're welcome.
Any other reports? Nope. All right. So next, Milko May, our student report. Welcome.
Hello, board. As the year progresses, the Student Council has made it a mission for the student body to continue spreading school spirit. Through the Student Council's Instagram and through Schoology, we've been updating students about dress-up days and virtual homecoming celebrations. As one of the virtual celebrations, the Student Council came up with a video featuring those traditionally a part of the homecoming assembly and those a part of different activities. Another project that I've had the opportunity to be a part of was a roundtable discussion discussing the roles of student resource officers. Dr. Battle, Mr. Helke, and I organized a group of diverse students to share their experiences and hopes for the SRO program. Chief Schwartz was also able to join in on our discussion to answer any questions we had for the program. Additionally, Mr. Helke and I will further the SRO discussion by creating a Jamboard for the Black Student Union to answer any questions other students may have. That is all. Thank you.
Wonderful report. Thank you very much, McColmey. Next, we will wrap up the report section with our superintendent's report. Dr. Battle.
Thank you, Chair Alt and members of the board. Tonight, I want to highlight 3 things to celebrate. First, last Friday, Burnsville High School Choir Director Jacqueline Smichael shared with us the fall virtual choir concert with the title Rise Up. The concert features songs with profound messages of standing up to do what's right. Despite not being able to perform the concert in person, the students and directors did an amazing job showcasing their talents and hard work. It really was a testament to the resilience and dedication in the face of challenging circumstances. I know that we've shared the concert through our social media channels and social media accounts, and that may be the easiest way for community members to find it. I certainly encourage everyone to do so. Next, you may have heard that Governor Tim Walz has declared today as Community Education Day in the state of Minnesota. In doing so, Governor Walz recognized the fact that community education is an efficient and effective way to respond to community needs, starting from birth and continuing throughout a person's life. We have always known the important role of community education in 191, whether in our incredibly strong early childhood and school readiness programs, and the important partnership represented in the Burnsville Senior Center with the city of Burnsville and everything in between. The past few months, community education has been leaned on even more heavily, providing childcare and food distribution, and more during a global pandemic. We would not be 191 without the people and programs of community education. So thank you to Director Tom Umhofer and everyone on his staff who makes it possible. And finally, this week, November 9th through 13th, is National School Psychology Week. It's a time to highlight the important work school psychologists and other educators do to help students thrive. In 191, our school psychologists are an essential part of the student support system that helps ensure needs are being met so that each student can learn and grow. The theme of this year's School Psychology Week is the power of possibility. That's what these educators do. They help open more possibilities for students, families, and their colleagues. So thank you to all of our school psychologists. And that concludes my report for this evening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Battle. Next, starting the business portion of our meeting, we'll start with the consent agenda. Although board action is required, it is generally unnecessary to hold discussion on these items. In the event a board member wishes to discuss an item, that item will be moved for a separate consideration. Is there anything that board members would like to separate? Okay, I will take a motion.
So moved.
Moved by Director Chester, second.
Second.
Seconded by Director Miller. Ms. Kenny, would you please call the roll?
Chester,
Aye.
Courier,
Aye.
Miller,
Aye.
Schatz,
Aye.
Alt.
Aye, and the motion carries. Next, we'll invite Lisa Ryder to rejoin us. We're being asked to approve the ice arena lease with the city of Burnsville. Welcome back, Lisa.
Thank you. Good evening. So the Burnsville Ice Arena rental agreement for our school year 2020-2021 is brought back to you since August, when at that point in time there were some changing events and just needed to make sure that our language was up to date with regard to COVID and things of that nature. So what you see before you and attached to the board book and for the public to see is a first of all a lead sheet for the recommendation, and then attached is also the ice arena rental agreement. As part of that is what is called a ice rink reservation report. And so as you look at the agreement, you'll note there's a date of November 5th that is included there with regard to a cancellation. It used to read out August 15th. That date's been changed to November 5th. And that is passed. But the reason for it being November 5th is that is the last time for our coaches and others to change the schedule of ice rentals. And so they had a meeting of the Minnesota State High School League in early November. It was after that then that they then needed a few days to get everything figured out and finalized. So that is why that date was changed to November 5th. Additionally, in section 10.1 of the contract language, you will find that it has been updated to address circumstances that may be beyond ISD 191's control when it comes to cancellation of events or practice times. And so you can see now that that language actually reads that it could be an excusable reason could be anything that includes limitations determined by federal, state, county, or local governments, and limitations put in place by Minnesota State High School League, or if a user's student body has an outbreak of COVID-19. So with that added language, it's far more clear for us that those will not be held against us. It is true that in the past, they have only billed us for the time that we have used, but now the contract language actually reads that way too. In addition, there's been some question with regard to our opportunity for reduced costs on some hours of renting when we rent so many hours in bulk. And the reality is the city does offer different rate structures throughout the day and has offered the cheaper ice times. They have early morning practices at $105 per hour and late evening practices at $195 per hour. Our coaches have chosen to utilize the times that we have listed. And so therefore the prices that you see, the rate is $230 per hour. There is a summary of hours that is anticipated for this next season. And again, based on what we just heard earlier, that could very well change. But we would see that 324.95 hours are estimated at this time for use of the ice. And that estimates out to about $72,488.50. So based on the reservation rink, the rink reservation list that we have at this time and the contract language as it reads, the recommendation is that the Board of Education approves the Burnsville Ice Center rental agreement for the 2020-2021 school year, assuming a rate per hour of $230 with 324.95 anticipated hours for an estimated amount of $72,488.50.
Thank you very much, Lisa. I'll take a motion to approve.
So moved.
Moved by Director Schatz, seconded by Director Miller. Any questions?
I do have a question. So Lisa, I didn't hear you say it. I didn't notice it in there that there's no minimums of ice time with this contract, right? We're simply billed on actual usage hours, right?
Right.
So
well,
yes.
So assuming if we were to cancel a practice that's on the schedule, we would need to have it fall under one of those categories. But in the past, they haven't charged us when we haven't used the ice. And we use the ice typically, unless there's a reason we can't now because of the circumstances we're under.
Right. Yeah. And so, yeah, I just wanted to confirm that there wasn't, if we end up not doing any rentals at all this winter, that there's no expectation that there's that we would have to use any ice time. Right?
That's true.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Schatz. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, Ms. Kenny, would you please call the roll?
All right. Courier?
Aye.
Miller?
Aye.
Schatz,
Aye.
Alt,
Aye.
Chester.
Aye.
And the motion carries. Thank you. Staying with Lisa, we're being asked to approve the financial audit report for 2019-2020.
Earlier this evening, you heard the conversation from the auditor, the principal of the auditing firm that performed the audit for us. I do have all printed copies here in the office. If you haven't received yours, it's here available for you electronically. These will be posted once approved by the board online. We have three main reports at this time: the comprehensive annual financial report, which you heard spoke of, and it's quite lengthy, and yet it's very informational if you want a long read. You want a short read, then there's the executive audit summary, which is put together with a lot of the key facts and points that we heard earlier in the presentation, as well as some legislative indicators as to what is anticipated, what laws have changed, what's coming up in the future. So that's very informational, and I find very, very useful for people to read through. Actually, it has probably the most information related to each of our fund enrollment and all those details, kind of those highlights you saw earlier. The third report you're going to see is an internal control and Minnesota legal compliance required report. This report typically falls within that single audit report that he mentioned wasn't coming to you at this time. And so it's a separate letter all by itself, and it's actually a bound copy when you look at the print copy. With the allocation of the CARES funds, the single audit testing hasn't yet been completed. So as you heard, that will be forthcoming in the future. I won't rehash what it is that he spoke of with regard to the various different components of the highlights of the audit, since we heard that earlier tonight. I would just move to the recommendation that the Board of Education approve the financial audit report for 2019-2020.
Thank you. I'll take a motion.
So moved.
Moved by Director Courier, second.
Second.
Seconded by Director Miller. Are there any questions, board members? All right. Seeing none, Ms. Kenny, would you please call the roll?
Miller,
Aye.
Schatz,
Aye.
Alt,
Aye.
Chester,
Aye.
Courier.
Aye.
And the motion carries. Staying with Lisa again, we're being asked to adopt a resolution canvassing return of votes of school district general election.
So it has, it's been a few days, it's been quite the week. And actually, I think it was this morning that we were picking up the tallies from the counties. So this is how condensed this particular time frame has been. Jamie worked very hard today to pull everything together for us. And so what you have before you is the resolution of the canvassing returns. You have attached to the board packet a abstract of votes cast. And so you can see there the totals of registered voters. You can see the totals of people that voted at each precinct. You can see the outcome of our election results related to our board vacancies and those that were up for renewal. And then you can see even the write-ins per precinct. All of that information is available in the abstract. The resolution is attached as well. We have three open seats that were filled in this election. And so that is all listed there. The recommendation is that the Board of Education adopts the resolution canvassing returns of votes of school district general election as presented.
Thank you. I'll take a motion.
So moved.
Moved by Director Schott, second.
Second.
Seconded by Director Chester. Any questions? Seeing none, Ms. Kenny, would you please call the roll?
Schatz,
Aye.
Alt,
Aye.
Chester,
Aye.
Courier,
Aye.
Miller.
Aye.
And the motion carries. Thank you. Our final regular agenda item, again with Lisa, we're being asked to adopt a resolution authorizing issuance of certificates of election and directing the school district clerk to perform other election-related duties.
So this includes, once you have canvassed the election, then the open positions that are now filled based upon the election has the three individuals, then Eric Miller, Anna Werb, and Tony Connor, who then have certificates that need to be issued by the board. And then as part of this packet, you will also see is an acceptance of office and oath of office that each candidate then or elect would be signing. And so the recommendation is that the Board of Education adopts a resolution authorizing issuance of certificates of election and directing the school district clerk to perform other election-related duties.
Thank you. I'll take a motion.
So moved.
Moved by Director Schatz, second.
Second.
Seconded by Director Chester. Questions? Seeing none, Ms. Kenny, would you please call the roll?
Alt,
Aye.
Chester,
Aye.
Courier,
Aye.
Miller,
Aye.
Schatz.
And the motion carries. Thank you. Now we will be adjourning to a workshop to review our variance policy. I will declare us adjourned right now, and we will also take a 5-minute break. Board members, please just return in 5 minutes. All right, let's get our workshop started. Essentially, we wanted to, earlier this year, we had talked about wanting to check in on our variance policy and how it's our new process is working once the fall enrollment numbers are known. So thus this workshop tonight. With that, I will turn it over to Dr. Battle and Stacy Soline.
Thank you. So as you stated, we revised 509.5 intra-district transfer, the variance enrollment policy, and tonight we'll give you an update of where we see the impact of that policy. And so I'll turn it over to Stacy.
Okay. I will try to be brief with the 37 slide presentation here. I know the evening is late, so we'll jump right in. Go. Within the policy under section D, just kind of highlighted the key points that the board does have the ability to suspend the implementation of the policy. It would be for the upcoming year. That action would need to occur no later than March 31st. And as a result, students may be required to reapply for a variance enrollment following. Last year, when we were looking at doing our school closing and our boundary changes, our goals here was the different options, option A and option B. We went with option A, was to try to balance out the schools. We weren't going to achieve complete balance across the district, as you can see with Sky Oaks and Hidden Valley, but we were trying to bring into alignment what that would look like. Boundary targets for our Black, Indigenous, people of color are trending as projected in most cases. Elementary, we were hoping to go somewhere between 60 to 75% as our target range. What we currently are at is 61 to 84%. Middle school, our target was somewhere between 60 to 70% was the target. Our actual is 69 to 70%. Our middle schools, as far as the percentage breakdown, are almost dead even. So speaking of our middle schools, last year, the percentage of students of color for Eagle Ridge was just over 60%, maybe about 62. Right now, they're right at 70%. Nicollet Middle School was over 70%, and now they're about 69%. This includes open enrollment, variances, and residential enrollment. Schools that stand out still are Hidden Valley. Hidden Valley went from about 87% down to 80%. Sky Oaks saw a slight increase. Sky Oaks, boundary-wise, not sure that we actually changed anything there. But the students that were in the boundary areas went from being primarily white to more students of color. And we can talk a little bit more about Sky Oaks. Harriet Bishop, you can see a significant increase in their percentage, bringing them in alignment with the other schools, the elementary schools, and the other elementary schools as a whole also saw increases in balance. Looking at our social economic status was one of the other components that we were looking at as we were doing our boundary changes. As we discussed in our enrollment meeting, free and reduced percentages are, it's hard to measure. I doubt that our boundary change had close to a 30% impact on Hidden Valley because of the boundary changes, but you can see each of the buildings is significantly lower. And again, we believe that's due to the drop in applications as a whole. Variances by grade level across the district are down. Kindergarten is the most significant area, which is good. That's where we're starting with, you know, the folks that are grandfathering over, fine. Families wanting to stay with buildings and friends that they were associated with, that's fine. but we also wanted to see a significant drop as far as coming into the district, folks staying at their resident building, which is what we've seen. We are down from 652 variances last year to only 532. I say only, that's a drop of 120. Students of color dropped from 397 to 344, and white students dropped from 255 to 188. Right now, our students of color make up 65% of our variance requests. Free and reduced dropped a little bit, as you can also see, from 282 to 162. And those students that were variance requests that had no, didn't receive any support stayed flat. We did have 3 buildings that had increases in variance enrollments. Gideon Pond had 36 students from Vista View, was their largest increase this year that requested to go to Gideon Pond. Hidden Valley had 10 students from Harriet Bishop, and Nicollet had 19 students that requested to go to Nicollet from Eagle Ridge. So many of the variances were actually going back towards the buildings. These were the 3 buildings that saw the biggest impact. The chart here is divided up to students of color on the left side and white students on the right. And you can see the significant increase of students of color requesting to go back to Gideon. I'm assuming go to Gideon Pond, I should say. Almost 30 and 9 more students that were white requested to go to Gideon Pond. Otherwise, the numbers were about 6, 19 to Nicollet for students of color, 1 for Hidden Valley that was white, and 6 more that were white for Nicollet. Our magnet schools, the schools that previously had magnet programming, Harriet Bishop, William Byrne, Ron, and Eagle Ridge, all saw a decline in the amount of variances requesting to go back to those buildings. Again, divided up with the left side of the chart being students of color, the right side being white, but we saw drops across the board. So the concern that schools that we had within the district that we were creating racially isolated buildings, again, is moving more towards balance with the residents, and folks aren't continuing to go there.
Stacy, can I?
Sorry for the shorthand conversation. I was a little awkward, but just we're not seeing an increase to return to the magnet schools. Is what that comes to.
Eagle Ridge hasn't been a magnet for a while now.
I understand. Any of the schools that had magnet programming is what I was referring to previously. This chart is just to make your eyes go batty. Really what this is demonstrating is that the high number here are the number of students in the building that are residents, and under 10% in most buildings is due to open enrollment or for variance request. The bulk of the buildings are actually made up based on the residents within their enrollment area. Buildings that we are keeping an eye on, again, would be Gideon Pond. They had a decrease as far as the residents, which again, Gideon Pond was one of our buildings that was over capacity. We needed to see a drop in their capacity, and we have, which we demonstrated in the enrollment presentation, even with students wanting to finish or go back to where they had been enrolled previously. So uptick for variances, open enrollments remain flat. Harriet Bishop residents actually increased as the variances decreased. William Byrne was one of the other schools that saw a significant increase into the residents. William Byrne, again, is one of our larger schools. We expected an increase in the residents. but you can see that there was a substantial drop as far as the variance request as well.
Would some of that be related to just the school closures though? Because Sioux Trail is right next to Burn. Oh, sorry. I didn't realize my mic's not going. There we go. There's my mic.
That much better. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Because with Sioux Trail closing and residents now being more in line with what would be residential area for Burn or even for Ron, is that why we're seeing some of the residents staying or that increase in residents?
Yep.
And then maybe hypothetically, some of the variants could be those that maybe were assigned to Sioux Trail may have varied into Burn, but no longer need to do that because now they're actually assigned to that school.
To a degree, that is at play. But I think folks are also aligned well with the buildings that they're in. Again, when we look across the grade level, when we look across some of the other information, the folks are pretty much just moving towards a school that is now their boundaries. There's nothing to draw them away because, again, if we're offering the same type of programming at all buildings, unless there is a family need for daycare, whatever, it doesn't make a lot of sense taking on that additional hassle to transport and do that. The other piece with all of this, most of our variance requests had already been processed or were in prior to decisions being made as to what our programming was going to look like in the fall. So yes, COVID did impact as far as number of students that went to the virtual academy, but those students are still registered at their home school. So this is fairly indicative of where folks were landing with this. Interesting, I looked at Sky Oaks. Sky Oaks has 86 students that are open and rolled out. 43 of them are students of color, 43 of them are white students. And let's see what my number here. Forgive me. The bulk of those students, close to 50 students of that 86, all went to Gideon Pond. So that's the only building that they were going to. The rest of them were 4 or 5 students total to other buildings.
All right,
They received like 39 students that came in. So there was a difference of about 50 students at Sky Oaks coming in versus going out. But it was very balanced. We have a lot of families that, I mean, we need to be careful of making the assumption that only white families are moving around in our district.
Stacy, can you hear
pardon
me?
me?
So you said there's 50 students that open and rolled out, but did you mean variance out?
Varianced over to Gideon Pond from Sky Oaks.
Okay, thanks.
Stacy, I wanted to follow up on something you said earlier, just to ensure I understand. So if somebody had been applied for a variance and was going to go, let's just say, from Hidden Valley to Harriet Bishop, then COVID plans hit and they decided to go virtual academy. Are you telling me you're now counting them at Hidden Valley or Harriet Bishop?
What was the first part of the scenario? They wanted to go from Harriet Bishop to...
Their natural home school is Hidden Valley.
Yeah.
And they had already applied for it and been accepted on a variance to go to Harriet Bishop.
Yep.
And then COVID happened and they decided to go virtual academy. Where are you counting them at?
Harriet Bishop.
Harriet Bishop. Okay, good. I thought I heard you say it would be their home school, in which case these numbers practically,
it was the school. It was the school in which they had been registered, whether it was resident or through a variance.
Okay, so after the dust settles and virtual academy goes, whatever, we stop having a lot of people go to it. Hopefully, we can able to maintain it. But regardless, there stands a pretty good chance that there might be some more major shifts going on here because, maybe somebody after a year doing virtual academy, they decide to go to their home school. The other thing interestingly, there was a bunch of shifts from Harriet Bishop to Hidden Valley, which I wonder, are any of those folks that would have been, like maybe they were at MW and got assigned to Harriet, but would rather go to Hidden because some of their classmates went to Hidden and wanted to follow them there? I mean, do we have any indication of that, or is it just it's not my historical record? It's not a usual that we had folks moving from Harriet to Hidden. That's why I'm just curious about what if we know what was driving that.
Well, okay. So,
or do you think it's just the end of the magnet programming and returning?
Yeah, I think that some of the students that were at Hidden Valley that had moved to a different residential boundary area that was in Harriet Bishop, like other students, said I wanted to go back and finish my school at Hidden Valley.
And that's what I'm sorry, I didn't articulate it well. That's kind of what I was asking. I shouldn't have brought up you had already taken into account that we had made the adjustment to move them to Hidden or to Harriet, and then now you're saying they're going back to Hidden, although in their eyes they never really left Hidden. But okay, that's what all right, trying to understand. All right, very good.
So through all of this, I just built a chart here to where we could compare two buildings at a time. Again, I currently have the district up here on the left as far as number of residents. Variances, again, make up such a small percentage and it is declining across the board. But you could compare, Gideon Pond here. You can see even Gideon Pond, as far as the total amount of variances, is declining over last year. We can look and see, again, pull up just for Harriet Bishop. Harriet Bishop does have, a lot of variances, but students of color decline, white students are declining, and then you can see kind of the total picture as well. I really am not seeing any negative impact on our enrollment in any of the buildings as a result of variances. It's a pretty balanced in most buildings in and out, and those buildings that did attract, like Harriet Bishop, is declining. And we would expect to see that for the next couple of years until they balance out to where the rest of the buildings are. Any questions?
Board members, any questions? Well, this is a lot of information to digest, having first seen these slides in the workshop. So I think I will defer to fellow board members in terms of the questions they might have. I'm sure some will bubble up. Oh, Director Courier has one.
Well, it's not really a question. It's the good old historical perspective that historically we've used variances in a practical sense. I granted them for childcare or for purposes to help families resolve mostly childcare. It became more political when I was still working as a principal. When we did the making of the schools where Harriet Bishop became, the sort of the crown jewel. But anyway, when we used it to help with childcare. So if it's not out of line now, I don't think we should change the policy, or I think it should settle out, especially where we've closed 2 schools and things are still settling out. We should see, I don't think we should either mess with the policy or tinker much. That would be my thoughts at this point.
Yeah, to your point, Eric, we had last year 3 students that were attending Hidden Valley from Harriet Bishop. This year we now have 13 that would have been in Harriet Bishop's residential area. So it was an increase of 10 students that looked to return to Hidden Valley.
Well, and I think we still have those 2 outliers that we had talked about earlier, Harriet Bishop and Sky Oaks, in terms of being identifiable racially.
Again, Harriet Bishop is going to take a couple of years as families move through the system. Harriet Bishop is, or not Harriet, Sky Oaks, I apologize. Sky Oaks is, you know, they have 11 students coming in from Vista View. And Ed Neal, they have like 4 students. But it's more along the line that so many of their students are going over to Gideon Pond. And I'm not sure if that's just because of the proximity of the neighborhoods, if there's a perception of different programming. I don't think it's anything in which the system is designed with that. I don't have a good answer for Sky Oaks as to why they haven't really made much movement one way or the other.
Well, and I guess the concern, of course, is that, you know, with the boundary change, one of our core goals was not to create schools that were identifiable, and the variance policy would allow us to accomplish that. With that said, we also welcome and embrace and serve each and every single student that arrives in our schools, and we hold high expectations for all. But again, going back to that, you know, the key elements of boundary change, you know, if variances are part of our system that are creating that reality, we need to keep an eye on that.
Yeah, I don't see the variances creating that. I don't see them creating, at this point in time, the inequities that they were. I see us moving away from that.
Well, and I think also our programming has changed
right.
over the, I mean, that's programming and instruction and all of that.
And I think it'll just take as Dee Dee said, it'll take a couple of years to really understand, you know, once we have these pathways, models implemented across the schools and across elementary, it might take a year or 2 for people to really understand that that's truly the case, you know, across all the schools, you know, because there's been different programming, different focus at different schools. So unless the policy begins to create some sort of inequities, as you say, Abigail, then to kind of let it work a little bit and see where we're at.
Yeah, and the pathways will be a game changer, to your point. It'll be consistent for everybody.
Yeah, I agree.
Any other comments, board members? Questions?
Oh, thanks, Stacy. Super interesting pivot tables as always.
Yes, thank you. This was really, really helpful and informative. With that, everybody, it's been a long meeting. Thank you for your work and your attention, and have a good night.
Thanks.
Night.